Hello everyone, and welcome to the Fictional Vortex. So we are back with an interesting movie on what if Naruto was an interdimensional sage god of pure chaos, Naruto x Charmcaster, Ben 10. But before we start, I just want to remind you to please subscribe to my channel and hit the like button if you enjoy my content. Let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Anomaly in Legerdemain. The air in Legerdemain tasted of ozone and regret. It was a flavor Charmcaster knew intimately, a metallic tang that clung to the back of her tongue whenever she pushed the boundaries of the arcane. Floating on a disk of obsidian polished to a mirror sheen, she hovered before a nexus of raw mana, a place where the arterial rivers of the dimension bled into a furious, roaring confluence. Below her, islands of pulsating crystal and petrified spells drifted in a slow, majestic ballet, their light painting the perpetual twilight of this world in hues of amethyst and sapphire. This was a place of power. A place of truth, and, she hoped, a place of severance. Her hands, gloved in supple purple leather, moved with a precision born from 1,000 nights of lonely study. They wove intricate patterns in the air, tracing sigils that burned with cold, silver light. Her voice, usually a tool of sharp wit or simmering resentment, was now a low, resonant chant, each syllable an ancient key turning a lock deep within the architecture of reality. She was not merely casting a spell, she was performing surgery on the tapestry of fate itself. The incantation was a complex web, of high Enochian and the forgotten glyphs of the Advaita, a dangerous cocktail she had spent years formulating. The target of this grand ritual was a prophecy, a venomous whisper that had haunted her since she'd first deciphered the forbidden texts of her uncle. It spoke of a sorceress of the rose, destined to bind herself in service to the architect of the flawless cog, a cosmic being of absolute, unyielding order. The prophecy promised power, yes, but the power of a gilded slave. It was a future she refused to accept. Every fiber of her being, every spark of her rebellious soul, screamed in defiance of a destiny written by another. Fado, te abrampo, she chanted, her voice rising, pulling at the nexus before her. Nexum, te delio, ego sum finis et inidium. My fate is my own. The mana rivers churned, frothing like a storm-tossed sea. The silver sigils she had drawn in the air flared, converging into a single, blinding point of light. She poured her will into it, a torrent of defiance, frustration, and desperate hope. The obsidian disk beneath her feet vibrated violently, a low hum that resonated deep in her bones. This was the critical moment. The threads of destiny were stretched taut, thrumming with tension. All she had to do was cut. But fate, she was learning, did not like to be cut. It was not a thread to be snipped with metaphysical shears, but a chain to be shattered. And when a chain of such cosmic significance is shattered, the resulting explosion is not a quiet affair. The point of silver light did not sever the unseen thread. Instead, it imploded. For a fraction of a second, there was a perfect, crushing silence, a void of sound and energy that seemed to swallow Legerdemain whole. Then, the void ripped open. It was not a tear, not a hole, but a violent, screeching wound in the very skin of the dimension. It was a shriek of impossibilities made manifest, a vortex of colors that had no names and geometries that defied sanity. It was wrong. It was a cacophony in the symphony of creation. And from its depths, something looked back. Charmcaster's carefully constructed ritual circle shattered. The protective wards she'd spent a week layering around. Her position evaporated like dew in a supernova. The backlash of raw, untamed energy slammed into her, throwing her from her obsidian disk. Her body felt like it was being simultaneously frozen, burned, and torn apart. Her senses screamed. The taste of ozone was replaced by the flavor of static and screaming stars. As she tumbled through the chaotic air, helpless, she saw the vortex stabilize, its shrieking maw contracting not into nothingness, but into a form. It was a man, and yet it was not. He seemed to be wearing a tattered black cloak, yet the cloak was made of the star-dusted void between galaxies. His hair was a brilliant, sun-bright gold, but it whipped and flowed as if caught in a solar flare, defying the non-existent wind. His skin was tanned, healthy, but seemed to shimmer, as if his form was merely a suggestion. A temporary agreement with the concept of corporeality. The most striking features, however, were his eyes. They were a blue so deep and profound they seemed to hold the entirety of an endless sky. And within them, tiny, mischievous galaxies swirled. And on his cheeks, 6 whisker-like marks were etched, not like scars, but like brands of some fundamental truth. He hung in the air where her ritual had died, looking around with an expression of mild, detached curiosity, like a man who had been woken from a long, interesting dream. He tilted his head, his gaze sweeping over the floating islands and mana rivers with a placid air. Then, his eyes, those impossible, cosmic eyes, landed on her. He blinked once, a slow, deliberate motion. In that instant, Charmcaster's chaotic tumble through the air stopped. She simply hung there, suspended 100 feet above a river of churning magical energy. The crushing pressure on her body vanished, replaced by a strange, tingling sensation. As if her very atoms were being observed and found interesting. The man floated towards her, not flying, but simply arriving where he wished to be. He moved with a liquid grace that was both utterly natural and profoundly unsettling. He stopped a few feet away, close enough for her to see the infinite depth in his gaze. "Well now," he said, and his voice was a paradox. It was a warm, friendly baritone. Yet it seemed to echo from the dawn of time. It was the sound of a crackling campfire and a collapsing star all at once. That was a rather rude awakening. "You know, I was having the most fascinating dream about a universe where squirrels achieved sentience and declared war on gravity. They were losing, badly, but their morale was inspiring." Charmcaster could only stare, her mind struggling to process the sheer impossibility of him. He wasn't a demon, nor an angel, nor any of the countless extra-dimensional entities she had studied. They all operated by rules, however alien. This being felt like he was the rules, and he was making them up as he went along. The ambient mana of legerdemain, usually a comforting, humming presence, was recoiling from him, twisting into knots and eddies like water shying from a hot iron. What are you?" she finally managed to choke out, the words feeling small and inadequate. The man smiled, and reality itself seemed to flex around the expression. It was a wide, genuine, and utterly terrifying grin. "That's a complicated question. The short answer: my name is Naruto. The long answer: we'd need a few eons and a much better snack selection." He looked around again. "This place is loud. All these rules, all this structure. It gives me a headache just standing here. Your magic is like that, too. So rigid. All, if this, then that. Where's the fun? Where's the, what if I just turned this spell into a flock of angry geese instead?" Before she could respond, a new sound cut through the air. It was a deep, resonant chime, a harmonic that vibrated not just in the ears, but in the soul. From the largest of the floating crystal islands, figures began to emerge. They were tall, humanoid constructs of pure, solidified magic. Their bodies made of intertwined, glowing runes. Their faces were smooth, featureless planes of light, and they moved with a synchronized, unnerving grace. The magical guardians of legerdemain. Beings of pure law, created at the dimension's dawn to purge any instabilities. They were a legend, a myth. No one had seen them in millennia. And now, dozens of them were converging on their position. Drawn by the gaping wound Naruto had torn in their reality. "Ah," Naruto said, his smile not faltering in the slightest. He looked at the approaching guardians with the same mild curiosity he'd shown everything else. "The local welcoming committee, I presume. They seem a bit stiff." "They're not a welcoming committee," Charmcaster said, a new wave of terror cutting through her shock. "They're executioners. They maintain the balance. They erase anomalies." Her eyes darted from the approaching guardians to Naruto. He was the ultimate anomaly. "Erase, you say?" Naruto hummed thoughtfully. "Sounds terribly boring." The lead guardian raised a hand. Its voice was not a sound, but a direct, telepathic imposition of will, cold and absolute. "Chaos entity detected. The sanctity of this domain has been violated. Your existence is an error. Prepare for nullification." Charmcaster felt a profound, primal dread. Nullification. Not just death, but complete and utter unmaking. She tried to summon her own magic, to raise a shield. But her power felt sluggish and unresponsive, intimidated by the presence of both the guardians and the chaotic being beside her. Naruto, however, just chuckled. It was a light, carefree sound that was utterly at odds with the impending doom. "Error. Nullification. You boys really need to learn how to liven up a party. He turned his cosmic gaze to Charmcaster, still hanging in the air beside him. You were the one who knocked on my door, so to speak. It seems only fair I help you deal with the noise complaint. He held up a hand, palm open towards the approaching phalanx of magical law. He wasn't bracing for a fight. He looked like he was about to conduct an orchestra. The lead guardian unleashed the first attack. It was not a bolt of energy or a physical projectile. It was an attack of pure logic. A wave of absolute law washed towards them, a spell designed to impose order on a quantum level, forcing anything it touched to revert to its most basic, stable state. For a being of pure chaos, it was the ultimate poison. Charmcaster felt its approach like a physical wall, threatening to crush her very soul, to simplify her existence back to dust. She closed her eyes, bracing for oblivion, but it never came. She heard a soft plink, like a pebble dropping into a quiet pond. She opened her eyes to see the wave of absolute law just stop, a few feet from Naruto's outstretched hand. It was frozen in the air, a shimmering, translucent wall. See, this is what I'm talking about, Naruto said, his tone conversational. He wagged a finger at the frozen spell. This is a statement. Things must be this way. It's so final. No room for negotiation. He then gently poked the wall of energy with his index finger. The moment his finger touched it, the spell shattered. But it didn't dissipate. The shimmering wall of pure, relentless order broke apart into 1,000 pieces, and each piece transformed. In a silent, breathtaking explosion of color, the spell became a swarm of monarch butterflies. They fluttered through the air, their wings dusting the twilight with gold and orange, a sudden, inexplicable pocket of life and beauty in this sterile, magical realm. The guardians paused, their featureless faces betraying no emotion, yet Charmcaster could feel their collective confusion, a discordant note in their perfect harmony. Recalculating, the lead guardian projected. Target is capable of conceptual reality warping. Shifting to second-tier erasure protocols. The guardians raised their hands in unison. The runes that composed their bodies began to glow with a fierce white light. The very space around them seemed to thin, the laws of physics groaning under the strain. They were preparing to unwrite this entire sector of legerdemain from existence. Sacrificing a part of their home to eliminate the threat. Oh, a committee decision. How democratic, Naruto quipped. He still hadn't moved from his relaxed, floating posture. He glanced at Charmcaster. So, purple is your color, huh? What's your name? Charmcaster, she breathed, her mind reeling. The world was about to end, and he was asking for her name. Charmcaster, a bit on the nose, but I like it, he said with a nod. All right, Charmcaster, close your eyes. This next part might get a little weird. She didn't need to be told twice. She squeezed her eyes shut, her heart hammering against her ribs. She didn't know what to expect, but she could feel the change. The oppressive, sterile power of the Guardians was building to an unbearable crescendo, a silent scream of absolute order. But underneath it, another power was stirring. It was the energy emanating from Naruto, and it felt completely different. It wasn't hot or cold, light or dark. It was playful. It felt like the fizz of champagne. The moment of inspiration for a new song, the thrill of a successful gamble. It was the feeling of pure, unadulterated possibility. Then, she heard the Guardians' collective telepathic cry. It wasn't a shout of victory, but a single, unified broadcast of pure, unadulterated shock. Impossible. The laws of causality are. The cry cut off. Silence. A gentle breeze, smelling faintly of cinnamon and freshly turned earth, washed over Charmcaster's face. It was a scent that had no business being in legerdemain. Tentatively, she opened her eyes. The Guardians were gone. All of them. In their place, floating serenely in the twilight, was a grove of magnificent willow trees. Their branches, heavy with glowing, silver leaves, swayed in the impossible breeze. Tiny, bell-like flowers chimed softly on their boughs, releasing spores of light that drifted lazily downwards. Where the implacable force of magical law had stood, there was now a scene of impossible, heartbreaking beauty. She turned to look at Naruto. He was admiring his handiwork, a satisfied smile on his face. A definite improvement, don't you think? He asked. They were so tense. All that talk of nullification. I think they're much happier as trees. Much more contemplative. Charmcaster was speechless. He hadn't fought them. He hadn't destroyed them. He had repurposed them. He had taken beings of pure, rigid law and transformed them into symbols of life, flexibility, and grace. He hadn't just defeated them. He had refuted their entire existence with a single, whimsical act. The our scale of power required to do such a thing was staggering. It wasn't magic as she knew it. It was artistry on a cosmic scale. He floated over to her and gently tapped her forehead. The feeling of suspension vanished, and she found herself standing on the obsidian disc again, which had somehow reassembled itself beneath her feet. It felt solid, stable. So, Naruto said, his grin returning, a playful glint in his galaxy-filled eyes. He gestured vaguely at the spot where her ritual had catastrophically failed. You went to all that trouble, woke me up from a perfectly good nap, and got the attention of those tree people. Must have been for a good reason. He leaned in a little closer, his presence both overwhelming and strangely comforting. You wanted to break a prophecy? He asked, his verses, OICE dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that seemed to make the stars themselves lean in to listen. Let's have some fun with it. The offer hung in the air, shimmering with potential. Her entire life had been a struggle for control, a desperate battle to master the forces that sought to define her. She had fought tooth and nail for every scrap of power, every ounce of freedom. And now, standing before her was a being who treated the fundamental laws of the universe like suggestions, a being who embodied the very concept of freedom. He was terrifying. He was chaotic. He was everything she had been taught to fear and guard against. And in that moment, she realized he was also the only thing in any universe that might actually be able to help her. The fear was still there, a cold knot in the pit of her stomach. But alongside it, something new was blossoming, a wild, reckless hope. For the first time, the future didn't feel like a cage she was hurtling towards. It felt like a blank page. She met his gaze, the endless blue of his eyes, and for the first time since she was a little girl, she felt the thrill of not knowing what would happen next. All right, Charmcaster said, her voice steadier than she expected. Let's have some fun. A slow smile spread across Naruto's face, a smile that promised adventure, madness, and the delightful unraveling of all things. The willows he had created chimed softly, their light reflecting in his cosmic eyes, and in that moment, Charmcaster knew that her life, and likely the universe itself, would never be the same. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. The Logic of a Broken Cog. The willow grove that had once been the implacable guardians of law chimed a serene, unending melody. The silver leaves cast a gentle, shimmering light, a stark contrast to the raw, violent tear in reality that had summoned Naruto. That wound had now healed, leaving behind no scar, only the lingering scent of cinnamon and the profound sense of a fundamental rule having been not just broken, but cheerfully ignored. Charmcaster stood on her obsidian disc, the familiar weight and texture beneath her boots one of the few constants in a world that had been turned upside down. She watched Naruto, who was currently attempting to teach one of the willow branches a complicated handshake. You see, the trick is in the wrist, he was saying to the tree, his voice earnest. It's all about conveying a sense of mutual respect and a shared secret, like we both know where the best ramen in the multiverse is hidden. The branch, impossibly, seemed to lean into his touch, its silver leaves rustling in a pattern that sounded suspiciously like a chuckle. Charmcaster finally found her voice, cutting through the surreal tranquility. You turned them into trees. It wasn't a question, it was an accusation, a statement of fact that her mind was still refusing to fully accept. Naruto turned away from his new arboreal friend, his cosmic eyes crinkling in a smile. They were so stressed. All that rigidity, it's terrible for the posture. They're much more relaxed now. Their photosynthesis is a wonder to behold. He floated over to her, his bare feet cross-legged in the air, his void black cloak swirling gently. Now, about that prophecy. You kicked a hole in the wall between worlds to escape a future somebody else wrote for you. I have to say, I admire the ambition. It's wonderfully chaotic. So, tell me everything. Spare no details. Who is this architect of the flawless cog, and why does he have such a monumentally dull title? She hesitated, the ingrained paranoia A sorceress who had always been either a hunter or the hunted, screaming at her not to reveal a weakness. But what was the point of caution now? She had summoned a being who could turn abstract cons. PTS into butterflies and eldritch guardians into a decorative garden. Secrecy felt quaint, obsolete. She took a deep breath, the air still tasting of impossible things. The prophecy is ancient, hidden within the grimoires of my lineage. She began, her voice a low, practiced monotone she used to distance herself from the words. It speaks of a being, the architect, who seeks to perfect the multiverse. To eliminate all flaws, all randomness, all chaos. She glanced at him, the irony thick enough to taste. It desires to turn all of creation into a single, perfectly functioning machine, a flawless cog. Every action, every thought, every life predetermined and optimized for maximum efficiency. An end to strife, an end to pain, but also an end to choice. The ultimate order. Naruto's expression was one of genuine, profound horror. That sounds awful, he said, his voice losing its playful edge for the first time. It's a universe with no surprises. Where would you get good stories? Ho would invent a new flavor of ice cream. What's the point of a sunrise if you know exactly how every single photon is going to land? That's not a perfected universe, that's a boring one. It's a story that's already been written. And the author died of boredom before finishing the first page. The simple, almost childish way he framed it resonated with her more than any philosophical argument. He saw the truth of it. The prophecy says that to achieve this, the architect requires a focusing lens, a mortal conduit with the potential to channel and impose that absolute order upon the magical planes. A sorceress of the rose. She gestured to the small, elegant rose insignia on her glove. It was the crest of her family, a symbol she had once worn with pride, but which now felt like a brand. My family has carried this potential for generations. I am the one in whom it is destined to awaken fully. I would gain immense power, but I would be a slave. The primary tool for the enslavement of everything. Her hands clenched into fists. I refuse. I would rather be erased from existence than be the key that locks every door in the universe. Naruto listened intently, his head tilted. Galaxies in his eyes seemed to slow their spin, focusing on her. When she finished, a slow, dangerous grin spread across his face. It was the grin of a master craftsman looking at a beautifully complex problem. A flawless cog, you say? An architect of order? Oh, this is going to be fun. He clapped his hands together, a sharp sound that echoed in the silent dimension. We are going to take this architect's grand, boring design, and we are going to scribble all over it in crayon. How? Charmcaster demanded, the desperation she'd been holding back finally cracking her voice. His power is conceptual. He doesn't just command armies, he commands logic itself. How do you fight logic? You don't fight it, Naruto said, his grin widening. You introduce it to its much more interesting and far more unpredictable cousin, absurdity. He uncoiled from his floating position and stood upright in the air. To understand the enemy, we must first understand the battlefield. And this place, he gestured to the ethereal beauty of Legerdemain, is too clean. Too straightforward. Magic here follows rules, even if they're esoteric. No, we need to go somewhere, messy. Somewhere beautifully, gloriously flawed. He reached out and, with 2 fingers, seemed to pinch the air in front of him. He then pulled. Reality tore, not with the violent screech of her failed ritual, but with the soft, satisfying rip of fabric. A shimmering, vertical slit of pure, unadulterated chaos hung in the air. Through it, Charmcaster didn't see another dimension of magic and wonder. She saw something far more alien. She saw the setting sun glinting off chrome and glass, heard the distant, chaotic symphony of car horns, and smelled the acrid, greasy perfume of fried onions and exhaust fumes. Where is that? She asked, her voice a whisper. Home, Naruto replied cheerfully, though she knew it couldn't be his home. Well, your home, anyway. The place you keep all your stuff. Bellwood, a wonderful collection of mismatched, contradictory, and utterly illogical cogs, all grinding against each other and somehow, miraculously, not collapsing into a heap. It's the perfect place to start a lesson in applied chaos theory. He gestured towards the rip in space with a theatrical bow. After you, my lady. Stepping through the portal was a disorienting experience. One moment she was breathing the cool, mana-saturated air of legerdemain, the next. She was hit by a wall of sensory information. The air was thick, humid, and alive with a million smells. Asphalt baking in the late afternoon heat, exhaust from a passing bus. Roasting nuts from a street vendor, the faint, unpleasant tang of pollution. The gentle chiming of the willow guardians was replaced by a cacophony of city sounds, the blare of horns, the distant wail of a siren. The overlapping chatter of a dozen languages, the thumping bass of music from a passing car. They had emerged in a cramped alleyway, sandwiched between a noodle shop and a store selling outdated electronics. The setting sun cast long, dramatic shadows, painting the brick walls in hues of orange and deep purple. It was jarringly, painfully mundane, and yet, seen through the lens of her recent experience. It felt utterly surreal. Naruto stepped out behind her, and the portal zipped shut with a sound like a satisfied sigh. He took a deep, appreciative breath. Ah, the smell of ambition and cheap cologne. Glorious. He looked around the alley, his eyes wide with fascination, taking in the overflowing dumpster, the graffiti-covered walls, and a particularly mangy cat that was giving them a suspicious look. Look at this. It's perfect. Nothing here works the way it's supposed to, but it all works anyway. The plumbing probably leaks, the power grid is a nightmare, people still get water and their TVs turn on. It's inefficient, illogical, and alive. The architect would hate it here. The cat hissed at them. Naruto just winked at it. The cat blinked, seemed to consider its life choices for a moment. Then gave a surprisingly eloquent meow, turned around, and walked headfirst into the brick wall, vanishing without a trace. Charmcaster stared at the spot, her jaw slack. He had an appointment, Naruto explained casually. Something about a clandestine meeting to unionize the city's stray population. Their demands include softer dumpster linings and a universal basic income of tuna. She decided, for the sake of her own sanity, to ignore that. What are we doing here, Naruto? In Bellwood. My fight isn't here. Of course it is, he countered, stepping out of the alley and onto the crowded sidewalk. Charmcaster hurried to follow, pulling the hood of her cloak over her head to obscure her distinctive white hair. This prophecy of yours, this architect, they're obsessed with perfection. Flawlessness. To break that, you need to learn to see the beauty and the power in the flaw. This city is a masterclass in flawed beauty. He moved through the crowd with an uncanny grace. A serene island in the rushing river of humanity. No one seemed to notice the man with galaxies for eyes and a cloak made of the night sky. Or if they did, their minds simply slid off the fact. Filing him away under, not my problem. Charmcaster, however, felt 100 pairs of eyes on her, the familiar weight of being an outsider, a sorceress in a world of mortals. Look, Naruto said, pointing to a traffic light. It was malfunctioning, flashing from red to green to yellow in a random, epileptic sequence. The traffic was a mess of honking cars and frustrated drivers. Order has broken down. The system has failed. And what happens? He gestured to the street. A traffic cop was in the middle of the intersection, waving his arms with a focused intensity, manually directing the flow of cars. People were yelling, but they were also, slowly, moving. A new, temporary, chaotic order is born from the failure of the old one. It's not efficient. It's not perfect. But it works. That police officer is practicing a more advanced form of magic than you've ever attempted. He led her on a walk through the city, a rambling, aimless journey that slowly began to feel like a pilgrimage. He saw the world in a way she never had. He found profound meaning in the cracks in the pavement, seeing them as stories of the earth settling. He delighted in a street performer juggling chainsaws, calling it a beautiful negotiation with probability. He bought a hot dog from a vendor, declared it a masterpiece of culinary chaos, then paid the man with a single, perfect autumn leaf that, when the vendor looked again, had become a crisp $100 bill. Charmcaster followed in a daze, her carefully constructed worldview crumbling piece by piece. She had always seen the world in terms of power and control. Mana flows, ley lines, incantations, wards, it was all about imposing her will on reality, forcing it to obey. Naruto didn't seem to impose his will on anything. He just nudged it. He whispered suggestions to reality, and reality, seemingly delighted by the novelty, was happy to comply. Her past was a chain of betrayals and disappointments. Her father's death, her uncle's manipulations, the hollow loneliness of her quest for power. These experiences had taught her to be hard, to trust no one, to build walls of magic and sarcasm around her heart. But as she watched Naruto convince a flock of pigeons to arrange themselves into a living, fluttering mosaic of Van Gogh's Starry Night, on the courthouse plaza, she felt one of those walls begin to crack. He wasn't just powerful, there was a joy to his power, an infectious, childlike wonder that she hadn't felt in ever. The sun had set completely, and the city was now ablaze with the artificial light of neon signs and street lamps. The energy had shifted, from the frantic hustle of the day to the prowling, electric hum of the night. It was a time she was more comfortable with, a time of shadows and secrets. "All right," she said, her voice finding some of its old, sharp edge. "I understand your point. The world is flawed. Chaos can be beautiful, but philosophy won't break a cosmic prophecy. For that, I need power. Resources. Things that, in this world, are not easily acquired. So you engage with the local systems of commerce," Naruto said, his eyes gleaming in the neon glow. "I have arrangements," she admitted, a hint of steel in her tone. "There's an information and artifact broker I deal with. An alien. He operates out of a converted warehouse down by the docks. He was supposed to procure a focusing crystal for the ritual you so rudely interrupted. And let me guess," Naruto said, "the arrangement is not an entirely friendly one." "He's a criminal," Charmcaster stated flatly. "His name is Vulcanus. He's a Detravite, arrogant, loud, and obsessed with technology that makes things explode. He respects only power and leverage. I was going to trade him a captured plumber's sidearm for the crystal. A deal that is now complicated. Because you no longer have the sidearm. Because I no longer have a reason to play by his rules," she corrected, a flicker of her old fire returning. She looked at Naruto. "You wanted to see how flawed systems work. The criminal underworld is the epitome of it. Let's go see Mr. Vulcanus. It's time for a renegotiation." A wide, predatory smile was Naruto's only answer. The warehouse district was a labyrinth of rust and shadows, the air thick with the smell of salt water and decay. The warehouse Vulcanus used as his base of operations was a massive, corrugated metal box. Seemingly abandoned save for the two heavily armed, reptilian-looking aliens standing guard at the main entrance. They held large, menacing plasma rifles, their beady eyes scanning the darkness. "His security is formidable," Charmcaster whispered, crouching with Naruto behind a stack of rotting crates. "The building is shielded against magical scrying and teleportation. His guards are mercenaries, loyal only to whoever pays the most." "Shielded, you say?" Naruto hummed, looking at the warehouse not as a fortress, but as a puzzle box. "That's a statement of intent. This is how things are. You cannot enter. So boring." He looked at her. "So, what's the plan? A frontal assault, a cunning infiltration, bribe the guards with the promise of a better dental plan." "My plan," she said, pulling her gloves on tighter, "is to walk in the front door. He's expecting me, just not with you." "I like it," Naruto beamed. "Simple, direct, full of potential for things to go wonderfully wrong." Charmcaster strode out from behind the crates, her hooded figure a silhouette of purpose against the gloom. The two guards immediately snapped their rifles up, the barrels glowing with latent energy. "Halt, state your business," one of them hissed, his forked tongue flicking in and out. "Charmcaster, I have an appointment with Vulcanus," she said, her voice dripping with carefully cultivated arrogance. The guards looked at each other, then one of them spoke into a device on his wrist. "Boss, the witch is here." A crackle of static, then a booming, gravelly voice replied. "Let her in, but her friend waits outside." The guard gestured with his rifle towards Naruto, who had casually sauntered up behind her. "You heard him. The sideshow stays here." Naruto just smiled his placid, infuriating smile. "Oh, I don't think so. He didn't move. He didn't cast a spell." But the plasma rifle in the guard's hands suddenly felt wrong. The guard looked down. The sleek, deadly weapon was no longer made of black, militarized alloy. It was now, impossibly, made of gingerbread. Intricate icing patterns traced the barrel, and a small gumdrop served as the trigger. The guard stared at it, his reptilian brain failing to process the transformation. His partner, seeing his confusion, raised his own weapon, only to find it had become a bouquet of vibrant, fragrant daffodils. Wah! Was all he could manage before Naruto gently tapped both of them on the forehead. They didn't collapse. They simply froze in place, a look of utter bewilderment on their faces, and began to slowly rotate. Like decorative statues on a lawn. "They're fine," Naruto assured Charmcaster, who was staring at the scene with a mixture of awe and horror. "They're just experiencing a compelling argument about the futility of armed conflict. It's a very persuasive argument. Might take them a few hours." He patted the gingerbread rifle. "And this is just wasteful." The rifle dissolved into a shower of golden dust that smelled faintly of cinnamon. He gestured to the massive metal door. "Shall we?" Charmcaster took a shaky breath and pushed the door open. The interior was a cavernous space, filled with crates of alien technology, weapons, and stolen goods. In the center of it all, standing on a raised platform, was Vulcanus. He was a short, stocky being encased in a bulky, dark gray suit of powered armor, his true, tiny form visible through the helmet's visor. "Charmcaster." His voice boomed, amplified by the suit's speakers. "You are late, and you have violated the terms of our agreement by bringing an associate. An associate who has, I see, redecorated my security staff. Explain yourself." "Plans have changed, Vulcanus," she said, striding forward, Naruto trailing behind her like a curious shadow. "I'm still here for the Inox crystal. But the price has changed." Vulcanus let out a harsh, grating laugh. "The price is non-negotiable. 1 grade 10 plumber firearm for the crystal. Why? Oh, you come here with empty hands and a pet clown, and you dare to make demands of me, Vulcanus." He slammed a gauntleted fist down on a console, and panels in the floor slid open. A dozen robotic drones, armed with laser cannons, rose up, their red optical sensors focusing on the two intruders. "This is the part where you're supposed to be intimidated," Naruto whispered to Charmcaster, looking at the drones with mild interest. Charmcaster ignored him, focusing her will. Her hands began to glow with a soft, pink light. "The only thing I demand is what you owe me, you walking tin can. Give me the crystal, and I'll consider leaving your scrap heap standing." "Insolent witch," Vulcanus roared. "Destroy them." The drones opened fire. A volley of crimson laser beams screamed across the warehouse. Charmcaster instinctively threw up a magical shield, a shimmering dome of pink energy that absorbed the first few blasts. But there were too many. The shield began to crack under the sustained barrage. And then, the laser beams began to bend. Mid-flight, the coherent beams of light wavered, twisted, and curved away from their targets. They wove through the air like playful ribbons, chasing each her in intricate loops before converging on the ceiling, where they spelled out the words, "Pew pew pew." In glowing, cursive script. The drones paused, their targeting sensors unable to comprehend why. Their perfectly straight shots were now practicing calligraphy. "You see," Naruto said, his voice calm amidst the sudden silence. He was holding his hand up, his fingers conducting the rogue laser beams like a symphony. "The problem with weapons is that they're predictable. They follow rules. The rule of this weapon is, go straight very fast. But, straight, is such a subjective term, isn't it?" Vulcanus stared, his tiny face contorted in disbelief. "What is this trickery?" "It's not trickery," Naruto replied, lowering his hand. The laser words faded. "It's a difference in opinion. You're drawn. And I have a fundamental disagreement about the nature of physics." He turned his attention to the drones. "And frankly, you're all very rude." He snapped his fingers. Every single drone simultaneously seized up. Their optical sensors flickered. Then, from their internal speakers, a new sound emerged. It was a perfectly harmonized, multi-part barbershop quartet rendition of a jaunty sea shanty. The drones began to move. But not to attack. They began to dance. A clumsy, metallic, but perfectly synchronized waltz, humming along with their own music as they pirouetted around the warehouse floor. Vulcanus was speechless. His ultimate security force, his pride and joy, was now a robotic musical theater troupe. "Now," Naruto said, his voice hardening ever so slightly, the playful edge replaced by something ancient and vast. About that crystal. Enraged and humiliated, Vulcanus slammed his fist on another button. You think you can mock me? I am Vulcanus. I am a force of nature. The armor on his back opened up, and a large cannon deployed over his shoulder. Behold, the chronostasis cannon, a weapon that fires a bubble of absolute temporal and physical order. Nothing moves, nothing changes. It is the perfect, unflawed prison, the ultimate expression of control. The cannon began to glow with a terrifying white light, charging with an energy that felt eerily familiar to Charmcaster. It was the same quality of absolute, unyielding law that the Guardians of Legerdemain had wielded. A focused application of pure, relentless order. Ah, Naruto said, a look of genuine interest on his face. A miniature version of what those tree people were trying to do. How quaint. The cannon fired. It didn't release a beam or a projectile, but a sphere of translucent white energy that expanded rapidly as it flew towards them. It didn't destroy what it touched. It simply subsumed it into itself. A crate it passed over was frozen, not just in motion, but in time, every molecule locked in a perfect, unchanging lattice. This was the architect's philosophy, weaponized. Charmcaster felt a primal fear seize her. Her magic would be useless against this. It was an anti-magic, an anti-chaos field of absolute stillness. Naruto didn't try to stop it. He didn't erect a shield or try to dodge. He simply watched it approach with a critical eye, as if judging its form. The sphere of order was about to engulf them. The ultimate expression of control, you say? Naruto mused, just as the field was about to hit. The thing about perfect systems is that they rely on axioms, unquestioned truths. And your little weapon has a very big one. He reached out and gently touched the edge of the expanding field. The moment his finger made contact, the sphere of absolute order did not shatter. It did not explode. It changed. The brilliant white light softened, swirling into a kaleidoscope of pastel colors. The menacing hum of locked time was replaced by the gentle, melodic tinkling of 1,000 tiny bells. The sphere stopped expanding and began to gently pulsate with a soft, warm light. Vulcanus stared, his jaw agape. Impossible. Nothing can alter the stasis field. You said it was a field of absolute order. Where nothing changes, Naruto explained, his voice echoing slightly within the now harmless bubble. But change is simply a transition from one state to another. What if the most orderly state isn't stasis? What if it's a perfect, repeating pattern? He had found the logical flaw. The weapon's programming assumed stasis was the ultimate order, but Naruto had introduced a new definition. He had rewritten its core axiom. What if, Naruto continued, a mischievous glint in his eye, the most perfect, orderly state is, for example, a newborn puppy. The sphere of energy collapsed in on itself. For a moment, there was a brilliant flash of light. When it faded, sitting on the floor where the sphere had been, was a small, impossibly cute golden retriever puppy. It had a little collar made of solidified light, and it looked up at Vulcanus and gave a happy little yip. The dancing drones stopped their waltz and stared at the puppy. Then, in perfect unison, they all said, "Ah," in a synthesized robotic voice, and their optical sensors changed from red to a pleasant, heart-shaped pink. Vulcanus's entire system of control, his entire worldview based on technological might and brute force, had been dismantled, refuted, and turned into a puppy. He stood there, his massive suit of armor seeming to shrink around him, the silence of his utter defeat more damning than any explosion. Naruto walked over to the main console, picked up a beautiful, multifaceted purple crystal that was sitting in a containment field, and tossed it to Charmcaster. She caught it, the cool, smooth facets a stark contrast to the thundering of her heart. The Inox Eye. I believe our business here is concluded, Naruto said cheerfully to the catatonic Vulcanus. We'll let ourselves out. I'd recommend you reconsider your career path. You might make a wonderful pet groomer. He turned to Charmcaster, who was still staring at the puppy, which was now chasing its own tail. You see, Naruto said softly, his voice for her alone. Every perfect system has a crack in its logic. Every flawless cog has a tooth that can be broken. The architect of order isn't unbeatable. He's just unimaginative. She looked from the crystal in her hand, to the dancing drones, to the puppy, and finally to the man with galaxies in his eyes. He hadn't just defeated a foe for her. He had given her a lesson. He had shown her a new way of seeing the world, a new way of fighting. He had shown her that the greatest weapon against absolute order wasn't greater power, but a better argument. It was a weapon she never knew she had. Hope, she realized, wasn't about finding a bigger sword. It was about finding a funnier joke. And as they walked out of the warehouse, leaving a bewildered alien crime Lord to contemplate his new life with a squad of lovesick robots and a chaos puppy, Charmcaster found herself, for the first time in a very long time, actually smiling. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. The Weaver in the Silent Sanctum. The lingering scent of ozone and gingerbread clung to the cool night air as they reappeared, not in the grimy alleyway, but on the rooftop of a silent, forgotten skyscraper overlooking Bellwood. The city spread out below them, a vast, glittering circuit board of light and motion. A chaotic, beautiful system humming with a million tiny, flawed lives. For the first time, Charmcaster saw it not as a cesspool of ignorance she had to tolerate, but as the very thing she was fighting to protect, a glorious, unpredictable mess. In her hand, the Inox Eye was a cool, heavy weight. Its multifaceted surface seeming to drink in the neon glow of the city. Naruto had conjured 2 surprisingly comfortable armchairs out of a rooftop ventilation unit. He sat in one, legs kicked up on a non-existent ottoman, looking down at the city with a fond expression, like a parent watching their child build a magnificent, teetering tower of blocks. The chaos puppy, which had insisted on coming with them and which Naruto had summarily named Sir Reginald von Barkington III, was currently chasing a gust of wind near the edge of the roof, his happy yips lost in the urban hum. So, Naruto began, breaking the comfortable silence. He gestured with a thumb towards the crystal in her hand. That's a pretty rock. Vulcanus seemed awfully attached to it. What's the plan? Are we going to use it to power a giant laser? Or does it get really good premium channel reception? Charmcaster ran a gloved thumb over the crystal's unnervingly smooth surface. It's an amplifier and a key. My ritual to sever the prophecy required a tremendous amount of focused power. The nexus in Legerdemain was the power source, but the Inox Eye was meant to be the scalpel, to shape the energy and target the specific threads of destiny I wanted to cut. She paused, her gaze distant. My original plan was flawed. I was trying to use a tool of order and precision to fight a concept of order. It was like trying to put out a fire with a meticulously constructed flame. You were fighting on his terms, Naruto noted, his cosmic eyes reflecting the grid of city lights. Trying to beat the system from within the system. It rarely works. The house always wins. Exactly, she conceded, the admission a strange mix of frustration and relief. But now, its purpose has changed. It's not a scalpel anymore. Now, it's a compass. The prophecy spoke of the architect needing a conduit, but it also mentioned safeguards, fail-safes put in place by older, wilder powers at the dawn of time. Faint echoes of resistance, places and people who are conceptually dissonant with the architect's grand design. They are the flaws in his flawless cog. The Inox Eye, when properly attuned, can point the way to the nearest, strongest dissonance. A compass that points to interesting people, Naruto mused, a slow grin spreading across his face. I like it. It's a cosmic matchmaking service for troublemakers. Let's fire it up. Charmcaster nodded, her expression hardening with focus. This was her element. She stood, holding the crystal in both hands, and moved to the center of the rooftop. The ether was thin here, polluted by radio waves and electricity, but it would have to do. I need to channel a small amount of power into it, keyed to a specific conceptual frequency. I'll focus on the core idea of the architect, absolute, unchanging order, and program the crystal to seek its antithesis. Its opposite, Naruto clarified. So, a really messy bedroom. She shot him an annoyed glare, but there was no heat in it. Its opposite, she said, her voice dropping into the low, resonant cadence of a caster. Unfettered possibility, true choice, the acceptance of 1,000 different outcomes. She closed her eyes, and the air around her grew heavy, the temperature dropping several degrees. A soft, purple aura, the color of twilight, enveloped her. She poured her will into the crystal, not the defiant, desperate anger of her failed ritual, but a cold, precise stream of focused intent. She visualized the architect's philosophy as she understood it. A perfect, crystalline grid extending infinitely in all directions. A universe of cold, hard angles and predictable lines. Then, with all her strength, she mentally screamed for its opposite. For curves. For randomness. For the beautiful, predictable chaos of a story yet unwritten. The Inox responded. It began to hum, a low, thrumming vibration that she felt in the bones of her arms. A soft, violet light bloomed within its core, pulsing in time with her own heartbeat. Then, the light erupted. Not in a flash, but as a single, solid beam of incandescent purple light that shot straight up into the night sky, piercing the thin air of clouds and disappearing into the star-dusted blackness above. For a moment, nothing happened. The beam just stood there, a silent pillar of light connecting a Bellwood rooftop to the heavens. Sir Reginald stopped chasing the wind and stared up at the beam, tilting his head with a curious whimper. "Is it supposed to do that?" Naruto asked, leaning forward in his transfigured armchair. "It's a bit flashy. We're going to get a noise complaint from the local aviation authorities." "It's gathering," Charmcaster said through gritted teeth, the effort of maintaining the connection making her tremble. "It's sifting through everything. Dimensions, realities, timelines." Then, the beam of light bent. As if it were a solid object, the top of the pillar impossibly curved, folding back down towards the earth. It moved with a slow, majestic grace, its tip sweeping across the horizon like a divine searchlight. It passed over the sleeping suburbs, the darkened industrial parks, the distant, glittering towers of the city center. Finally, it stopped, pointing towards a remote, mountainous region far to the east. The beam then collapsed in on itself, shrinking back into the crystal with a oft whump that sent a ripple of displaced air across the rooftop. The violet glow within the Inox faded, replaced by a single, steady pinpoint of light that seemed to hover deep within its geometric heart, pointing in the direction the beam had indicated. Charmcaster swayed, exhausted, and stumbled back. Naruto was there in an instant, his movement a blur that was too fast to follow. Tly steadied her with a hand on her shoulder. His touch was warm and solid, a strange anchor in the dizzying sea of magical backlash. "Easy there," he said, his voice losing its usual playful lilt, replaced by a note of genuine concern. "That looked like it took a lot out of you." "It did," she admitted, breathing heavily. "But it worked." She held up the crystal. The pinpoint of light within it pulsed softly, a steady beacon. "There, in the Himalayas. A place that shouldn't exist. It's shielded, folded away from the world. A pocket dimension, anchored to a physical location on Earth, but entirely separate from it. I can feel its resonance. It's ancient, and it's powerful." Naruto peered at the crystal, his eyes narrowing in concentration. The swirling galaxies within them seemed to focus, resolving into something that looked disconcertingly like a cosmic telescope. "Ah, I see it now. It's tucked into the space between a Tuesday and a Wednesday. Very clever. The wards are elegant. They don't block entry. They simply convince you that you have better things to do than enter. They're woven from pure apathy. Most people who stumble upon the entrance would suddenly remember they left the oven on, or feel an overwhelming urge to go sort their sock drawer." He straightened up, his grin returning. "Apathy wards. I love it. They're so polite." "So, what is this place?" "A secret wizard spa, the lost city of procrastination. The resonance feels meditative," Charmcaster mused, her strength slowly returning. "It feels like a place of absolute stillness, yet infinite motion. It's a paradox. It feels like a library of thoughts that haven't been thought yet." She looked at Naruto, a new sense of urgency in her eyes. "Whatever it is, it represents a fundamental opposition to the architect. We need to go there. Now." "The Himalayas it is," Naruto declared. He snapped his fingers. The two armchairs and the non-existent ottoman folded back into a single, mundane ventilation unit. Sir Reginald trotted over, the gust of wind apparently vanquished, and looked up at him expectantly. Naruto scooped up the puppy and tucked him into the folds of his void cloak, where the dog vanished with a contented sigh. "Transportation. We could take a plane, but the in-flight movies are always terrible. Or," he held out his hand. The space in his palm shimmered, then solidified into a perfect, intricate paper airplane. It was folded from something that wasn't quite paper, something that shimmered with the light of distant nebulae. He held it out to her. Or we could do it with a bit more style. Charmcaster stared at the paper airplane. You can't be serious. Who said anything about being serious? He replied, his eyes twinkling. He gently tossed the airplane into the air. It didn't fall. It hovered for a moment. Then began to grow. In seconds, the tiny paper craft expanded into a sleek, elegant vehicle the size of a small jet, its form still retaining the sharp, folded angles of its origin. A cockpit of shimmering, transparent energy formed at the front. It hovered silently above the rooftop, its impossible existence a quiet insult to the laws of aerodynamics. Naruto hopped in and patted the seat next to him. Come on. The fate of the multiverse waits for no one. And I think they serve complimentary chaos peanuts on this flight. The journey was unlike anything Charmcaster had ever experienced. There was no roar of engines, no feeling of acceleration. The cityscape of Bellwood simply receded. The world became a map, then a globe, then a marble. They flew through the upper atmosphere. The curve of the earth a breathtaking spectacle of blue and white, the stars above a cold, hard fire. The paper that wasn't paper craft was a perfect bubble of warmth and silence, gliding through the void with impossible grace. Naruto hummed a cheerful, nonsensical tune, occasionally making course corrections by gently folding one of the craft's wings into a slightly different shape. In what felt like mere minutes, they were descending. The jagged, snow-capped peaks of the Himalayas rose to meet them, a fortress of rock and ice under the pale light of the moon. The pinpoint of light within the inox eye was flashing frantically now, indicating they were close. Naruto guided the craft not towards a specific peak, but towards a seemingly empty stretch of cliff face on a vast, windswept mountain. This is the place, he said, his voice echoing slightly in the silent craft. The entrance is hidden behind a waterfall that only flows when a truly honest thought is thought nearby. A lovely bit of poetic security. He paused, looking at the barren rock face. Of course, there hasn't been a waterfall here in about 5,000 years. The wards are a bit out of date. He landed the craft on a narrow ledge, and it silently folded itself back down into a small paper airplane, which he tucked into his cloak. The air was thin and bitingly cold, the wind a lonely, keening sound. They stood before a sheer wall of granite, hundreds of feet high. There was nothing there. So how do we get in? Charmcaster asked, pulling her cloak tighter around herself. Her breath plumed in the frigid air. The polite way is to knock, Naruto said. He walked up to the rock face and knocked 3 times. The sound was flat, dull. Nothing happened. All right, the less polite way. He aced his palm flat against the cold stone. He closed his eyes. For a moment, he was perfectly still. Then, the rock began to change. Not violently, but with a gentle, flowing motion, like honey. The granite swirled, its crystalline structure reorganizing itself. An archway formed, the stone twisting into elegant, carved pillars and a curved lintel. Through the opening, there was not a dark cave, but a soft, warm light and the scent of sandalwood and old parchment. The ward of apathy is gone, Charmcaster breathed, feeling the subtle shift in the local reality. The concept of not wanting to enter has just ceased to exist here. It got bored and wandered off, Naruto said with a shrug. Happens to the best of us. He gestured into the archway. Let's see who's home. They stepped through the archway and left the world of ice and wind behind. They were in a long, circular corridor carved from a warm, cream-colored stone. The light came from glowing crystals embedded in the high, vaulted ceiling, casting a gentle, welcoming glow. The air was warm, still, and carried the quiet reverence of a holy place. The only sound was the soft, rhythmic chanting of a single, melodious voice, showing from somewhere deeper within the sanctuary. They followed the corridor as it curved, the chanting growing louder. It opened into a vast, circular chamber that took Charmcaster's breath away. The chamber was immense, the ceiling so high it was lost in shadow. The walls were lined with endless shelves, but they didn't hold books. They held threads, billions upon billions of glowing, ethereal threads, each one a different color. Each one pulsing with a soft, living light. They stretched from floor to ceiling, a library of light, a forest of fate. In the center of this impossible chamber sat a woman. She was seated on a simple, woven cushion before a colossal loom, a magnificent contraption of silver and polished wood. Her back was to them, and she was focused on her work, her hands moving with a blur of practiced grace, weaving dozens of the glowing threads into a complex, shimmering tapestry. She was the source of the chant, a low, melodic hum that was both a song and a prayer. She was dressed in simple, elegant robes of deep blue, and her hair was the color of spun moonlight, long and straight, cascading down her back. Even from a distance, Charmcaster could feel an aura of profound peace and ancient wisdom emanating from her. This was the dissonance. This was the being who stood in opposition to the architect. As if sensing their presence, the woman's hands stilled. The chanting stopped. The silence that followed was absolute, profound. Slowly, gracefully, she turned. Her face was serene, beautiful in a way that was both timeless and ageless. Her eyes were a pale, silver gray, like a calm sky just before dawn, and they seemed to see not just them, but the path they had taken to get here and the infinite paths that stretched out before them. There was no surprise in her expression, only a deep, patient acceptance. The anomaly and the unraveled, she said, her voice soft, yet it carried across the vast chamber as if she were whispering in their ears. I have seen your coming. I have seen it for 1,000 years, a single, discordant thread in the great tapestry. I did not know what form it would take, only that it would begin with a knock. She inclined her head slightly. You are expected. My name is Lyra, and this is the sanctum of woven paths. Welcome. Charmcaster was taken aback by the calm reception. She had expected suspicion, a challenge, not a serene welcome. You knew we were coming. Lyra's silver eyes drifted to Naruto. I did not know. Who? I only knew. What? A force of such profound chaos that the threads of fate themselves recoil from it, refusing to be woven. A hole in the tapestry. And a companion. Her gaze shifted to Charmcaster, a thread that has forcibly torn itself from the loom, trailing frayed ends that lash out at the pattern around it. The description was so accurate it was unsettling. Naruto, for his part, was looking around the chamber with wide, fascinated eyes. This is incredible, he said, his voice full of genuine awe. You're a weaver, not just of threads, but of stories, of possibilities. This is the most beautiful, chaotic, and wonderfully complicated library I have ever seen. A faint, ghost of a smile touched Lyra's lips. It was the first ripple in her placid demeanor. You see the chaos in it. Most see only the order of the weave. You were the first visitor in centuries to understand the sanctum's true purpose. We do not dictate fate. We merely observe its infinite, beautiful complexity. We are the guardians of choice. And that is why we are here, Charmcaster said, stepping forward. We are fighting a being who wants to destroy choice. A being called the Architect, who wants to weave this entire library into a single, unchanging thread. Lyra's expression grew somber. The smile vanished. The great simplifier. The unraveler. The weaver of the single thread. He has many names in our lore. An ancient fear. We believed his victory was an impossibility, a future that could never be woven. But the threads have grown, tense, of late. The colors are beginning to fade. Her silver eyes found Naruto's again. The tapestry predicted that his rise could only be challenged by that which has no place within it. By you. Well, that's a lot of pressure, Naruto said cheerfully. But I'm always happy to help mess up the plans of anyone who takes themselves too seriously. Especially, someone who wants to make the entire universe beige. Lyra rose to her feet. She was taller than Charmcaster had expected, with a natural, flowing grace. She glided towards them, her blue robes making no sound on the stone floor. Your arrival is a sign. But the sanctum has remained hidden for eons by observing, not acting. To ask us to intervene in the great weave is to ask us to abandon our most sacred vow. A vow of inaction won't mean much when the architect burns your library down, Charmcaster countered, her tone sharp. Lyra's gaze was not offended, merely sad. Perhaps. But tradition is a powerful thread. It holds us together. She stopped before them, her silver eyes holding an ancient weight. Before I can even consider your request, you must show me you understand what it is you are fighting to protect. You must pass a test. A test? Charmcaster asked, her hand instinctively straying towards the pouch where she kept her spell components. Not of power, Lyra clarified, her gaze fixed on Naruto. but of philosophy. You, the anomaly. You stand outside the weave. You see all possibilities. The test is simple. She gestured to the colossal loom behind her. Show me one thing the loom cannot weave. Show me a choice that cannot be made. Show me a thread that does not exist. It was a paradox, a classic philosophical trap. The loom, by its very nature as a representation of all possibility, contained everything. To show it something it couldn't contain was, by definition, impossible. It was a test designed to be failed, a polite, spiritual way of saying, go away. See. Charmcaster opened her mouth to argue the flawed logic of the test, but Naruto held up a hand, silencing her. He looked at Lyra, a thoughtful expression on his face. He wasn't looking at her as an obstacle, but as a kindred spirit. A fellow artist who worked in a different medium. That's a good one, he said appreciatively. A true koan, a weaver's riddle. He looked at the loom, at the billions of threads. The infinite potential futures, pasts, and presents they represented. He looked at the tapestry Lyra had been working on, a complex, beautiful story of a world he didn't recognize. Then he smiled, a slow, brilliant, reality-bending smile. All right, I'll take your test. He walked towards the loom, his footsteps echoing in the vast, silent chamber. Charmcaster and Lyra watched, one with anxious apprehension, the other with serene, patient curiosity. Naruto didn't touch the loom. He didn't try to manipulate the threads. He simply stood before it, looking at the shimmering tapestry of fate. You want to see a choice that cannot be made, he said, his voice filling the space. The problem is, any choice, once conceived, creates a thread for itself, right? The choice to act, the choice not to act, the choice to turn left, the choice to turn right, even the choice to do something impossible simply creates a thread of failure. He turned back to Lyra. You've trapped me in a web of logic. Very clever. He then held up his index finger. But the loom has the same flaw as Vulcanus's cannon. It operates on an axiom. It assumes that every thread represents a consequence, an outcome, a story that goes somewhere. He gently touched the tapestry that Lyra had been weaving. The moment his finger made contact, a change occurred. It was subtle at first. A single thread in the tapestry, a brilliant crimson one that represented a king's decision to go to war, suddenly stopped. It didn't break. It didn't unravel. It just ended. In the middle of the weave, it turned into a perfect, infinitesimally small dot of light. And went no further. The consequences of that decision, the threads of battle, of victory, of loss that stemmed from it, all vanished. The part of the tapestry they had occupied was now blank. A patch of pure, empty potential. Lyra gasped, her composure finally breaking. Her silver eyes were wide with disbelief. She took a step closer to the loom. What did you do? I introduced it to a new concept, Naruto said softly, his finger still touching the now altered tapestry. You asked me for a choice that cannot be made. But what about a choice that is, itself, the destination? A decision made for its own sake, with no past cause and no future effect. A moment of pure, unadulterated spontaneity. He drew his finger across the tapestry. As he moved, threads of fate simply stopped. A merchant's journey to a distant land ended mid-step. A lover's confession faded into silence before the final word was spoken. A star that was meant to go supernova just decided not to. He wasn't destroying the futures. He was giving them the option to simply opt out. He had introduced the concept of never mind to the fundamental structure of causality. He turned back to Lyra, whose face was a mask of stunned, reverent awe. This, he said, gesturing to the blank patches now appearing all over her life's work, is the thread that does not exist. The choice to not be a part of the story. The ultimate freedom. The freedom to simply be. He had not just passed her test. He had fundamentally expanded her understanding of her own sacred art. He had shown the guardian of infinite choice an entirely new spectrum of freedom she never knew existed. Lyra sank to her knees, not in defeat, but in worship. She looked from the altered tapestry to the man with galaxies in his eyes. And she finally understood. He was not a hole in the pattern. He was the weaver of the page on which the pattern was drawn. The prophecy was incomplete, she whispered, her voice filled with a new, fervent energy. It did not just foretell your coming. It foretold our salvation. She looked up at him, her silver eyes clear and resolved. The sanctum will not stand by. I will not stand by. My vow was to protect the sanctity of choice. And you have shown me that there is no greater threat to it than the weaver of the single thread, and no greater champion for it than you. She rose to her feet, her serene calm replaced by a fierce, burning purpose. My name is Lyra. I am the keeper of the loom of possibility. My life and the knowledge of this sanctum are yours to command. The architect wants to turn the universe into a single, predictable line. Then we shall teach it to dance. Charmcaster watched the exchange, a complex mixture of emotions swirling within her. She was relieved, vindicated, and something else. A strange, unfamiliar pang of something. It wasn't jealousy, not exactly. It was a sense of complication. Lyra's devotion was absolute, born from a moment of profound, philosophical revelation. It was pure. Charmcaster's own alliance with Naruto was born of desperation and a grudging, growing respect. Her path was thornier, her heart more guarded. She was the unraveled thread, after all. Naruto, seemingly oblivious to the complex emotional currents, simply beamed at their new ally. Excellent. I knew you were our kind of people. So, what's the first step in teaching a universe to dance? Lyra's eyes became distant for a moment, as if she were reading the newly reformed threads of fate. The architect's plan is already in motion. He is not just a concept, he has agents. Physical extensions of his will. They are moving to secure pieces of an ancient equation known as the logic engine, a device that would allow him to impose his will on physical reality. Not just conceptual space. Her eyes focused. The first piece is on a world of sentient crystal, a place where emotions are currency and memories are carved into living mountains. A world called Xylos. Agents of a cosmic being of pure order trying to find a magical math machine on a planet of emotional crystals, Naruto summarized, tapping his chin. That sounds wonderfully, delightfully absurd. I think we're going to have a lot of fun there. He looked from Charmcaster, the fiery, rebellious sorceress who had torn herself from fate's design, to Lyra, the serene, wise Auric. Who had just pledged her life to protecting it. One a spark of defiance, the other a sea of infinite possibility. The first members of his chaotic little band were assembled, and as the three of T.H.M. stood in the heart of the Library of Fate, surrounded by the infinite stories of the multiverse, Charmcaster knew their own story was just beginning. It was a story the architect could never have predicted, and it was going to be a masterpiece. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. The Symphony of Crystalline Souls. Arrival on Xylos was not a transition, it was an assault on the senses. One moment they were in the serene, silent sanctum. The next they were standing in a world bathed in the light of a sapphire sun, where the very air thrummed with a low, continuous chime. There was no soil under their feet, only a vast, rolling plain of translucent, violet crystal that seemed to hum with a life of its own. The sky was a canopy of deep indigo, and instead of clouds, great, slow-moving shoals of shimmering, geometric motes of light drifted lazily, casting shifting, fractal patterns on the landscape below. The air smelled of petrichor and cooling metal, a clean, sharp scent that was strangely invigorating. Trees, if they could be called that, grew in elegant, spiraling formations, their trunks of polished obsidian branching into delicate canopies of resonant, bell-like crystals that tinkled with every subtle shift in the atmospheric pressure. Small, multi-limbed creatures made of what looked like spun glass skittered between the crystal flora, their movements creating tiny, melodic arpeggios that added to the world's constant, gentle music. Well, Naruto said, breaking the stunned silence as he looked around with an expression of pure, unadulterated delight. This place is certainly resonant. He tapped a foot on the violet ground, and a deep, pleasing tone, like a cello note, echoed up his leg. The whole planet is a musical instrument. I love it. Sir Reginald von Barkington III, who had been released from Naruto's cloak, seemed to agree. He let out a happy yip, and the sound didn't just travel through the air, it sent a visible ripple of turquoise light through the crystalline ground beneath him. He looked down, surprised, then yipped again, watching the ripple with fascination. Lyra, the weaver, stood with her eyes closed, her serene face tilted towards the sapphire sun. The threads here, they are not woven from causality, she murmured, her voice filled with a quiet awe. They are woven from harmony. From emotion, every life, every action, contributes a note to the great song of this world. It is exquisite. Charmcaster, however, was on edge. She drew her cloak tighter, the sheer, overwhelming alienness of the place setting her teeth on edge. Her magic felt strange here. When she tried to draw on the ambient mana, it didn't feel like a river of power, but like trying to catch a specific melody out of a symphony. It was slippery, conditional. It's beautiful, I suppose. If you like living inside a giant wind chime. Lyra, your reading of the threads, where do we find the logic engine piece? Lyra opened her silver eyes, which seemed to reflect the shifting light patterns in the sky. The focal point of this world's song is a city called Resonance Prime. It is where the Xylans, the crystalline people of this world, gather to harmonize their collective consciousness. The logic engine piece, an artifact of pure, unfeeling logic, would create the most profound dissonance here. It would be drawn to the heart of the symphony, like a silent scream in a choir. That is where we must go. As they began to walk, the ground chimed with every footstep, creating a unique, rhythmic melody that followed them. They soon came upon their first inhabitants. The Xylans were tall, slender beings, their humanoid forms composed of countless facets of glowing, colored crystal. They had no discernible faces in the human sense, just a smooth, continuous surface where a head should be, from which a soft, internal light pulsed in time with their emotions. Their speech, it was hard to tell. Their movements were a slow, graceful dance, and their voices were a complex harmony of musical tones. One of them glided towards the newcomers, its internal light shifting from a calm blue to a curious, inquisitive yellow. Greetings, discords, it chimed, the woe. RDS forming in their minds not through telepathy, but through a direct translation of its harmonic vibrations. Your melody is strange, full of sharp angles and silent pauses. It is not an unpleasant sound, but it is unpracticed. What brings you to the fields of first harmony? We're travelers, Naruto said, stepping forward with a friendly wave. Just visiting. We're looking for the city, Resonance Prime. The Xylan's light warmed to a gentle, welcoming orange. A noble chord to strike. To seek the heart is to wish to join the song. Follow the lay tones. They will guide you. It gestured with a long, crystalline arm. And they saw what it meant. Flowing through the violet ground were rivers of brighter, pulsating light, all flowing in the same general direction. Ley lines of pure sound. We thank you for your information, Charmcaster said, struggling to find the right word. The Xylan's light flickered to a questioning lavender. Your harmony offers gratitude, but it is an untraded note. A transaction requires balance. A gift of joy for a gift of direction. Charmcaster stared, completely at a loss. A transaction of joy. Naruto chuckled. I think I get it. He stepped up to the Xylan and, with a perfectly genuine, warm smile, recounted the story of teaching the Willow Guardians a handshake. He didn't tell it for any strategic purpose, he just shared the simple, absurd joy of the moment. As he spoke, the Xylan's internal light brightened to a brilliant, ecstatic gold. Such a delightful dissonance. It chimed, its form vibrating with pleasure. To offer a greeting to that which has no hands. The absurdity is a wonderful, complex chord. The debt is paid, the transaction is complete. May your path resonate with pleasing frequencies. With a final, warm pulse of light, the Xylan glided away, leaving Charmcaster utterly bewildered. Emotions are currency, Lyra observed softly. Joy, sorrow, curiosity, wonder, these are the foundations of their entire society. To share an experience, a feeling, is to engage in commerce. This world is more alien than I could have imagined. It's not alien, Naruto said, his eyes sparkling. It's just honest. They've just head away all the middlemen and trade in the thing that really matters. They follow the lay tones, the landscape growing more complex around them. Great, sculpted mountains of pure, clear quartz rose in the distance. And Charmcaster realized with a jolt that they weren't natural formations. The surfaces were covered in intricate carvings, patterns that shifted and flowed. What are those? She breathed. The memory spires, Lyra answered, her voice hushed. The Xylan method of history. They do not write books. They carve their significant memories, their strongest emotions, directly into the mountains. Those are the collected histories, sorrows, and triumphs of their entire race, stored as resonating emotional frequencies. They don't read their history, they feel it. As they drew closer to the city, the ambient hum of the world intensified, resolving into a clear, breathtakingly complex symphony. Resonance Prime was not a city of buildings, but of spires. Thousands of crystalline spires, each a different color and material, rose from a massive, bowl-shaped valley. Each spire produced a different note, a different tone, all of them blending into a single, unified harmonic that was the city's lifeblood. At the very center of the valley stood the largest spire of all, a colossal structure of pure, diamond-like crystal that pulsed with a brilliant, white light. The resonant spire, Lyra said. The heart of their world. The conductor of the symphony. But as they looked upon the magnificent cityscape, they realized something was wrong. The symphony was flawed. A jarring, discordant note, a low, ugly, grinding sound, was woven into the harmony, making the beautiful music sound strained and painful. Some of the smaller spires were flickering, their light dimming, their notes souring. The xylons in the streets below were moving sluggishly, their internal lights a dull, muddy gray of anxiety and fear. "That's our dissonance," Naruto said, his playful demeanor gone, replaced by a sharp, focused intensity. "The architect's agent is already here, and they're poisoning the song." They made their way into the city, the oppressive, discordant hum growing stronger with every step. The feeling of wrongness was a physical weight, a pressure in the air. The xylons they passed resonated with a palpable sorrow. They approached one whose light was a dim, flickering blue. "What's happening here?" Charmcaster asked, her voice soft. "The music is sick." The xylon turned to them, and for the first time, they felt an emotion that wasn't a pure, clean note, but a muddy, painful chord of despair. The silence. It vibrated, the thought word laced with terror. It came from the sky. A being of perfect, terrible emptiness. It seeks the heart note of the first logic. It has muted the voice. The voice, Naruto prompted. The one who sings the prime harmony. The conductor. She resides in the great spire, and from there, she harmonizes the song of our world. But the Silent CE has wrapped the spire in a field of nothing. It dampens emotion. It drains color. It smothers the music. Our voice is trapped, and without her, the world song will unravel into a scream, and then, nothing. The architect's agent is laying siege to the city's core, Lyra summarized, her face grim. By suppressing the emotional resonance that powers this world, it creates an environment where a being of pure logic can thrive. It is terraforming the conceptual landscape. "Not on my watch," Naruto said, his jaw set. He looked to the central, diamond-like spire. It was surrounded by a faint, shimmering field of gray energy. A visible aura of null emotion that seemed to suck the light and sound out of the air around it. "Let's go meet this." Silence. Getting to the great spire was a challenge. The closer they got, the stronger the dampening field became. The air grew thick and heavy. The world's beautiful chime faded into a dull, monotonous drone. Charmcaster felt her own emotions being leached away. Her anger and determination replaced by a cold, flat apathy. It was a terrifying sensation, like her very soul was being bleached. "It's a conceptual attack," she grit out, fighting to hold on to her sense of self. "It targets the will. My magic. It's hard to grasp. It's like trying to start a fire with wet wood." "It is a weapon of pure order," Lyra said, her own face pale. She was struggling as well. The infinite possibilities she normally perceived narrowing down to a single, gray, inevitable outcome of failure. It attacks the very concept of choice by making you feel like no choice is worth making. Only Naruto seemed unaffected. He walked through the oppressive gray field as if it were a light spring rain, his expression one of annoyed concentration. "It's trying to bore me into submission," he said. His voice a sharp, clear note in the dull drone. "It's not very good at it. I've sat through lectures on galactic tax law. This is nothing." His own chaotic energy was a shield. A fundamental refutation of the oppressive apathy. He was so far outside the system of order and emotion that the field's logic simply couldn't get a purchase on him. They reached the base of the great spire. Standing before the main entrance was the source of the silence. It was a tall, androgynous figure clad in a seamless, form-fitting suit of stark white material. It had no face, only a smooth, blank surface. Like an artist's mannequin, it did not stand so much as it occupied a space with perfect, unyielding stillness. It was the architect's agent. An auditor. Your presence is an illogical variable. The auditor projected, its voice a perfect, uninflected monotone, devoid of any tone or feeling. This world is being corrected. Its inefficient, chaotic system of emotional transaction is being streamlined. The hard note of the first logic is a key component. Its retrieval is a mathematical certainty. Your interference is statistically insignificant. I've heard that before, Naruto said, cracking his knuckles. It's usually what people say right before I turn their grand, logical plan into a flock of angry geese. The auditor tilted its blank head. Threats are an expression of emotional imbalance. They are irrelevant. It raised a hand, and the gray, dampening field around them intensified. You will be pacified, Charmcaster cried out as the apathy washed over her. A crushing wave of despair that brought her to her knees. Her magic sputtered and died. Lyra staggered, her connection to the infinite threads of fate severed, leaving her blind and adrift in a sea of gray nothingness. But as the wave hit Naruto, something remarkable happened. He took a deep breath, and he sang. It wasn't a song with words or a recognizable melody. It was a pure, chaotic, and joyously defiant note of pure being. It was the sound of a supernova and a baby's laugh, of a perfect joke and a heartbreaking goodbye, of 1,000 squirrels declaring war on gravity. The note ripped through the auditor's field of silence, not by overpowering it, but by being so conceptually alien that the field couldn't process it. The oppressive gray field wavered, and for a moment, Charmcaster and Lyra could breathe again. You can't pacify a paradox, Naruto said, his grin returning. Your logic is too simple. You think the opposite of order is disorder. But it's not. It's more complex order, he charged. The auditor, for the first time, reacted. It moved with a stiff, precise economy of motion, its limbs blurring in perfectly calculated trajectories. It met Naruto's attack not with brute force, but with flawless geometry. Every punch Naruto threw was deflected by a perfectly angled block. Every kick was evaded by a precise, fractional sidestep. It was like fighting a supercomputer. Your movements are inefficient, the auditor droned, effortlessly parrying Naruto's seemingly wild attacks. Wasted energy. Predictable patterns. Patterns. Naruto laughed. We're just warming up. He glanced back at the others. Lyra, give me a path. Charmcaster, give me some noise. Galvanized, Lyra closed her eyes, focusing past the gray static. She could only see a few seconds into the future, but it was enough. Left foot, a 3.7 degrees slip in the crystalline substrate. For 0.12 seconds, its balance will be suboptimal. At the same time, Charmcaster forced her will into the world. She couldn't draw on the grand symphony, but she could create her own, ugly, defiant noise. She slammed her hands on the ground, and a raw, jagged spike of purple energy, a magical chord of pure spite and defiance, erupted from the ground. It wasn't elegant, but it was loud. The sound spike distracted the auditor for a nanosecond. Naruto, following Lyra's prediction, shifted his weight precisely. The auditor's perfectly calculated block met empty air as Naruto slid past it, and for the first time, he landed a blow. His fist, glowing with a chaotic, multicolored energy, slammed into the auditor's chest. There was no sound of impact. But the auditor's seamless white form flickered. Error, it stated, its monotone voice carrying a hint of something. Static. Emotional energy signature detected. Purging. Too late for that, Naruto yelled. The battle became a strange, three-part dance. Lyra called out probabilities, tiny flaws in the auditor's perfection. Charmcaster provided magical chaos, not to damage the auditor, but to disrupt the perfect logic of its environment. And Naruto, guided by one and shielded by the other, became a living embodiment of unpredictability, his Ting style less a martial art and more a form of weaponized jazz. But the auditor was adapting, its combat algorithms recalculating with every passing moment. It was still winning, its perfect defense slowly but surely forcing Naruto back. It's learning too fast, Charmcaster yelled, sweat beading on her forehead. We can't keep this up. We don't have to beat it, Naruto grunted, dodging a perfectly aimed strike that would have bisected him. We just have to break the lock. He looked at the shimmering entrance to the great spire. We need to get the voice back in the game. He looked to the spire's peak. It was a single, sharpened point of diamond. Lyra, what's the probability of me hitting that exact point from here with a focused energy blast? 0.0001%, Lyra answered instantly. He atmospheric resonance will deflect it. Perfect. Naruto grinned. Just the right amount of impossible. He began gathering energy, a swirling vortex of pure chaos forming in his palm. What are you doing? Charmcaster demanded. You'll miss. That's the point, he yelled back. The auditor's whole game is predicting the logical outcome. But what if the outcome is completely illogical? He fired. A beam of roiling, multicolored energy shot towards the sky, missing the spire's tip by a mile, just as Lyra predicted. The auditor's blank face tracked the beam, calculated its trajectory, and dismissed it as a miss. It turned its attention back to Naruto, classifying the action as a wasted, illogical move. But the beam didn't dissipate. High in the indigo sky, it struck one of the shoals of geometric light motes. The mote it hit was a focusing crystal. The beam was instantly caught, refracted, and split into 1,000 smaller beams, which then bounced to other motes, creating a cascade of ricocheting light. It was a cosmic game of billiards, and in less than a second, the single missed shot had become a storm of light converging from every direction on a single point, the very tip of the great spire. The combined energy struck the spire. A deafening, perfect C-sharp note rang out across the entire planet, a pure, clean tone that shattered the auditor's dampening field like glass. Light and color and sound rushed back into the world. The auditor froze. Cascading logic failure, it droned. The variable was the sky itself. With the field down, the doors to the great spire slid open. A figure emerged, bathed in a brilliant white light. It was another Xylan, but her crystalline form was more complex, more refined, composed of what looked like pure, solidified light. This was the voice. My song was silenced, she chimed, her mental voice a melody of heartbreaking beauty and newfound strength. But you have given me the key. Thank you, strangers. Her light flared, and she began to sing. It was the prime harmony, the song that held the world together. The music washed over the city, repairing the damage, soothing the frayed notes, reinforcing the symphony. The auditor staggered back, the pure, complex emotion of the song anathema to its sterile nature. Emotional resonance at critical levels. System integrity failing. Let's give her some backup. Naruto yelled. He turned to Charmcaster and Lyra. Don't fight it. Add to it. Your verse. Your voice. Sing. Charmcaster, caught up in the moment, focused not on anger, but on the fierce, burning passion for Fr. Edom that had driven her to defy fate itself. She unleashed a stream of magic, not as a weapon, but as a harmony, a wild, rebellious viola line in the grand orchestra. Lyra, for her part, opened her mind, not to see the future, but to feel the infinite beauty of all possible presents, adding a deep, resonant chorus of 1,000 choices to the song. Naruto conducted them all, weaving their disparate energies together, adding his own chaotic, improvisational melody that filled all the empty spaces. And the voice, Serafina, was the center, the soaring, brilliant soprano that tied it all together. They wove a song of defiance, of choice, of beautiful, glorious flaws. The auditor's white form began to crack, unable to process the sheer, complex beauty of the logic of music. This is not chaos, it managed, its monotone voice fracturing. This is art. With a final, shattering chord, the auditor's form dissolved, not into dust, but into a million motes of gray light that were quickly absorbed into the world song and harmonized into a minor, mournful chord, its silence finally given a place in the music. Silence reigned for a moment, and then the symphony of Xylos returned, stronger and more beautiful than before. Deep within the great spire, a small, perfectly smooth, gray cube, the logic engine piece, rose from a pedestal and floated into Lyra's waiting hands. The voice, Serafina, glided towards them, her internal light a warm, grateful rainbow. She focused on Naruto. You did not just fight the silence. You understood the song. You heard a music that we, in our perfect harmony, had forgotten was possible. A music of improvisation, of chaos. The best songs are the ones you make up as you go along, Naruto said with a tired, happy grin. Serafina's light pulsed. They've been the voice of this world for 1,000 cycles. I have sung the same perfect song. You have shown me that there are other songs in the multiverse. Songs I wish to learn. She paused, a chord of pure, clear resolve emanating from her. My world is safe, but the silence will return for others. The great composer of your song needs more voices. I wish to add my own. Charmcaster felt that strange pang again, sharper this time. Another one, drawn to him not by his power, but by his spirit. She couldn't even be angry. She had seen what he'd done. He hadn't just saved this world. He'd made it more beautiful. We'd be happy to have you, Lyra said with a gentle smile, speaking for them all. Naruto just winked at the being of pure light and music. Welcome to the band. Practice is on Tuesdays. They stood there for a moment. A sorceress of defiance, a weaver of fate, a singer of life, and their chaotic, impossible conductor, bathed in the light of a sapphire sun, the symphony of a saved world playing just for them. They had their first piece of the puzzle. But they also had a new, powerful ally, and a much clearer understanding of the beautiful, messy, musical universe they were fighting to protect. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. The Forge of a Dying Star. The transition was a physical blow. The gentle, melodic resonance of Xylos was ripped away, replaced by a deep, gut-rumbling thrum that vibrated in their bones. The clean, crisp air became a thick, superheated blanket smelling of ozone, burnt iron, and the faint, acrid tang of coolant. They stood on a grated metal walkway, suspended in a cavern of impossible scale. The soft, ambient light of a sapphire sun was gone, replaced by the angry, terrifying glare of a dying star. It hung in the void beyond a series of shimmering, hexagonal energy shields, a bloated, crimson monstrosity named Cinder, its surface roiled with sluggish, violent flares, great tendrils of plasma arcing out into space like the final, desperate grasps of a drowning god. The entire structure they were in, a web of gantries, pipes, conduits, and massive, blocky habitats, was built in a precarious orbit around this celestial deathbed. This was Hephaestus 9, the Forge. The heat was a constant, oppressive presence, radiating through the soles of their boots from the metal decking. The air tasted recycled and metallic. The constant, low-frequency of unimaginably powerful machinery was their new reality. Huge, robotic arms, hundreds of meters long, moved with a slow, ponderous grace in the void outside the shields, tending to the station's outer hull. It was a world of grim, functional industry, a city built inside an engine. By the threads, Lyra whispered, her serene composure momentarily shaken by the sheer, brutal reality of the place. She looked at the dying star not as a thing of beauty or terror, but as a vast, decaying knot in the tapestry. The future of this place is a single, fraying chord. Serafina, the voice of Xylos, resonated with a low, mournful chord. Her light form dimming in the harsh, unfiltered glare. The song here is a dirge, she chimed in their minds. A single, sustained note of struggle against silence. It is heavy, so very heavy. Even Naruto's usual ebullience was tempered. He stared at the dying sun, the swirling galaxies in his eyes reflecting its sullen, crimson light. They're living on a time bomb, he said, his voice quiet. And they've decided to argue with it. There was a deep, profound respect in his tone. I think I'm going to like it here. Charmcaster was the first to regain her practical edge. The inox eye is pointing deeper inside, towards the core of this scrap heap, she said, pulling the crystal from her pouch. The pinpoint of light within was a steady, insistent beacon. Let's find who's in charge before we all get cooked. Navigating the forge was an exercise in grim observation. There were no decorative flourishes, no parks, no art. Every surface was bare, functional metal. The people were much the same. They were clad in heavy, grease-stained work coveralls, their faces smudged with grime and etched with a permanent, weary tension. They moved with purpose, their expressions closed and guarded. When they saw the newcomers, a sorceress in a purple cloak, a serene woman in blue robes, a being of pure light, and a man who seemed to subtly defy the lighting system, they didn't stare with wonder. They stared with the flat, assessing gaze of people who had no time for anomalies, then went back to their work. After a few terse inquiries, they were directed towards the Forge Master. The term was spoken with a mixture of reverence and fear. They followed the directions, descending deeper into the station's metallic guts, the heat and noise intensifying with every level. They finally arrived at a set of massive, blast-proof doors. Etched on the front was a simple, stark symbol, a hammer crossed with a slide rule. The doors hissed open before they could knock, revealing a control center that was a maelstrom of controlled chaos. Every wall was a screen, displaying thousands of streams of data, complex schematics, and live feeds of the dying star's roiling surface. In the center of the room, standing on a raised platform, was a woman. She had her back to them, and she was a study in fierce, focused energy. Her fire-red hair was pulled back in a tight, practical, and slightly messy bun, with stray strands clinging to her sweat-sheened temples. She wore a stained, dark gray tank top that revealed arms corded with lean muscle and traced with what looked like faint, silvery, circuit-like tattoos. Her trousers were heavy-duty work pants tucked into steel-toed boots. She was yelling, not at a person, but at the holographic interface floating in front of her. "No, you stupid piece of junk," she snapped, her voice a low, gravelly alto, roughened by stress and too much caffeine. "Reroute the tertiary plasma conduit through the magnetic bath. Less before you recalibrate the gravimetric compensators. Do you want to vent the entire coolant system into Cinder's chromosphere? Because that's how you do it. Execute." She swiped a hand through the air, and a dozen data streams reconfigured themselves. The deep hum of the station shifted pitch slightly, a sign that her command had been obeyed on a macro-structural level. Without turning, she spoke to them, her voice dripping with impatience. "I don't have time for a tour. The Pilgrimage Committee meets on Thursdays. If you're here about the C-Deck protein synthesizer malfunctioning again, I'll a report with maintenance and get in line. It's only a priority if it starts dispensing something other than gray nutrient paste." "We are not here about the synthesizer," Lyra said, her calm voic. A stark contrast to the woman's abrasive energy. "We are here for the Forge Master." The woman finally turned, and Charmcaster felt a jolt of surprise. She was younger than her voice suggested, probably in her late 20s. Her face was sharp and intelligent, with high cheekbones, a dusting of freckles across her nose, and eyes the color of molten steel. They were the most intensely focused, exhausted, and intelligent eyes Charmcaster had ever seen. She scanned the four of them in a single, sweeping glance, her mind seeming to catalog, analyze, and dismiss them in a fraction of a second. "Congratulations, you found her," she said, her tone utterly flat. "I'm Kalen, Forge Master of this rust bucket, Chief Engineer, and lead babysitter for a star that's throwing a multi-billion-year temper tantrum. Now, you have 60 seconds to tell me why you're more important than the imminent, fiery death of every single person on this station. Starting now." A digital timer appeared in the air beside her head, already counting down from 1 minute. Charmcaster stepped forward, holding up the Inox Eye. "We're tracking an artifact of immense power. It's a component of a device called the Logic Engine. Our readings indicate that it's here, at the heart of your station." Kalen's steel-gray eyes flickered to the crystal, and for a barest fraction of a second, a spark of interest showed through her weary cynicism. "The Inox Eye, a reality-refracting crystalline matrix. Interesting. Never seen one outside of a textbook." Her gaze then hardened again. "You're talking about the entropy break. And you're not getting it." "The entropy break?" Lyra questioned. "It's what keeps this whole rig from being turned into incandescent vapor," Kalen explained, gesturing impatiently to a massive schematic of the station's core. "It's a one-of-a-kind, custom-built chronoton field generator, stabilized by a unique computational matrix." She pointed to a symbol on the schematic that matched the object Lyra held. "It's the heart of my stabilization system. It doesn't just hold the station together, it projects a localized temporal distortion field that slows the decay of Cinder's core. It is, quite literally, the only thing buying us time." Her eyes narrowed. "I salvaged that artifact from a derelict vessel in the Kepler belt a decade ago. I spent 5 years cracking its operational principles. I have spent the last 5 years integrating it into every critical system on this station. So, you can take your metaphysical quest and you can." An alarm suddenly blared, a harsh, piercing siren that cut her off. Red lights began to flash across the control room. "Proximity alert, unidentified vessels on an intercept course," a synthesized voice announced. Kalen swore, a short, sharp, ugly word. She spun back to her console, her hands flying across the holographic controls. Vessels. Out here. Nobody comes this far into the grave tangle. A viewscreen flickered to life, showing the star-dusted void outside. 5 objects were approaching. They were not sleek ships. They were brutalist, geometric shapes, all hard angles and dark, non-reflective surfaces. They looked less like They were flying and more like they were brutally imposing their existence upon the space they occupied. They are not vessels, Lyra said, her voice grim. They are conclusions, the physical manifestation of a solved equation. The architect's agents, Charmcaster breathed. They're not waiting this time. Whoever they are, they're not responding to hails and they're not powering down their weapons, Kalen snapped. On the screen, energy signatures began to build on the approaching shapes. Shields to maximum. Deploy the picket drones. All hands to battle stations. The forge groaned around them as massive energy shields flared to life and hidden weapon ports opened on the station's hull. Small, agile defense drones swarmed out to meet the intruders. The battle was joined in the fiery glare of the dying star. Kalen was a master conductor in a symphony of destruction. Her hands danced across her console, rerouting power, directing drone formations, and anticipating the enemy's movements with cold, logical precision. The picket drones, her creations, were fast and deadly, firing streams of plasma at the geometric invaders. But the enemy was relentless. When a drone scored a direct hit, blowing a chunk out of one of the dark shapes, silvery, liquid metal tendrils would immediately emerge from the wound, patching and repairing the damage in seconds. Their repair protocols are instantaneous, Kalen muttered, her knuckles white as she gripped the edge of her console. They're adapting. My drone's frequency modulations are being countered before the second volley even hits. The invaders, which Naruto dubbed constructs, were not just durable, they were brutally efficient. They didn't dodge, they simply absorbed the hits, repaired, and continued their inexorable advance, firing back with beams of pure white energy that didn't explode, but simply erased whatever they touched. A picket drone caught in the beam vanished without a sound, leaving not even debris behind. They're not fighting to win, Naruto observed, his eyes narrowed on the viewscreen. They're fighting to solve a problem. And we're the problem. One of the larger constructs broke through the drone screen and slammed into the station's outer hull. The entire control room shuddered violently. Hull breach on Deck 7. Automated defenses are engaged, the computer voice announced calmly. A new SC. Reen showed a corridor filled with robotic sentry guns firing at a hulking, multi-legged machine that had breached the wall. It was made of the same dark, self-repairing material. It ignored the sentry fire. The plasma bolts splashing harmlessly off its hide, and continued its methodical advance, tearing through bulkheads as if they were paper. Its armor is reconfiguring its molecular structure to match the energy frequency of the plasma turrets, Kalen grit out, her face pale. It's learning. My own defenses are making it stronger. She was trapped in a feedback loop. Her logical, predictable defenses were being countered by a superior, faster logic. She was being outmathed. So, Naruto said, his voice cutting through the tense, frantic energy of the room. Stop being predictable. Before Kalen could snap a retort, he vanished from the control room. A second later, he appeared on the security feed, standing in the corridor directly in the path of the hulking construct. He was unarmed, his hands in his pockets, and he had a thoughtful expression on his face. Naruto, what are you doing? Charmcaster's voice screamed in his mind, a frantic, telepathic connection she had established. Studying, he sent back, his mental voice calm. The construct paused, its optical sensors focusing on this new, illogical variable. It raised a limb that ended in a shimmering plasma cutter. Okay, Naruto said aloud, to himself. Let's see what happens when you introduce a bad idea. He looked at a massive coolant pipe running along the ceiling. He flicked his finger at it. A tiny, almost invisible crack appeared in the metal. The super-cooled, highly pressurized liquid inside began to jet out in a fine, near-invisible spray. The construct, its logic dictating that the most direct path was a straight line, charged. As it passed under the pipe, the coolant spray hit its superheated armor. The laws of thermodynamics took over. The instantaneous, catastrophic temperature change did something no weapon had been able to. The construct's adaptive armor, for a fraction of a second, couldn't compensate. Micro-fractures spread across its surface. It wasn't enough to stop it, but it was a flaw. A vulnerability. The construct swung its plasma cutter. Naruto didn't dodge. Instead, he reached out and touched the weapon. The searing hot plasma didn't burn him. It just changed its mind. Instead of a blade of pure heat, it suddenly became a stream of thick, sticky, pink bubblegum, which enveloped the construct's limb, hardening instantly. The construct paused again, its internal processors trying and failing to understand how its weapon had been transmuted. "Your problem, Kalen," Naruto's voice echoed in the control room as he casually evaded a clumsy strike from the machine's other limb. "As you're trying to break the wall, you need to convince the wall it was a door all along." He slapped his palm on the construct's main body. A wave of multicolored energy, pure, unadulterated chaos, washed over it. The construct's self-repair nanites went haywire. Given a sudden, infinite set of new instructions, they didn't know which one to follow. Instead of repairing, they began to create. The dark, brutalist machine suddenly sprouted elegant, filigreed wings made of chrome. A series of brass trumpets grew out of its back and began to play a lively jazz tune. Its legs reconfigured themselves into a unicycle. The terrifying war machine teetered for a moment, then fell over with a comical crash of discordant brass notes, utterly neutralized. Back in the control room, Kalen stared at the screen, her mouth hanging slightly open. Her meticulously designed, logical defenses had failed. This clown had defeated a seemingly invincible machine with a coolant leak, bubblegum, and a bad sense of humor. It defied every principle of physics, engineering, and common sense she held sacred. It was the most infuriating, and the most brilliant, thing she had ever seen. The battle outside was still raging, but Naruto's intervention had bought them a moment. He reappeared in the control room, looking thoughtful. "They're not just machines. They're physical arguments. And our argument is, anything that can be broken, will be." "It's a very convincing argument." Kalen finally snapped out of her stupor. She didn't thank him. She rounded on him, her steel-gray eyes blazing with a frustrated fire. "What was that? You violated the second law of thermodynamics, at least 3 principles of materials science, and the warranty on my coolant system. You don't just do that." "Why not?" Naruto asked, with genuine curiosity. "Because there are rules," she shot back, gesturing wildly at the universe in general. "The cosmos is a grand, complex, but ultimately understandable machine. It operates on laws, gravity, causality, conservation of energy. You can't just ignore them because they're inconvenient." "I'm not ignoring them," Naruto said calmly. "I'm just suggesting friendlier amendments." He walked over to her primary console, peering at the impossibly complex equations she was using to model Cinder's decay. "You're brilliant, truly. You're using gravimetric lensing G to reinforce the star's magnetic field and siphoning off coronal plasma to reduce its core temperature. You've built a life support system for a star. That's incredible." Kalen was momentarily stunned into silence by the casual, accurate assessment of her life's work. "But your math has a hole in it," Naruto continued, tracing a line on her holographic display. "Right here. You've accounted for every variable you can measure. But you haven't accounted for the unmeasurable. You haven't accounted for your patient being in a bad mood." He tapped the screen. "You're trying to save the star. Have you ever tried asking it what it wants?" The statement was so absurd, so profoundly unscientific, that Kalen could only stare at him. "It's a star. It's a ball of gas and nuclear fire. It doesn't want anything, doesn't it?" Naruto countered, his eyes turning to the angry, red giant on the viewscreen. "It wants to rest. It's tired. You're forcing it to stay awake, and it's fighting you every step of the way. Your logic, your beautiful, brilliant math, is at war with the star's own nature." Another massive shudder rocked the station. "The external constructs are converging," the computer announced. "They're forming a boring drill." On the screen, the 4 remaining ships were locking together, their forms melting and reshaping into a single, massive, corkscrew-like weapon aimed directly at the Forge's core. "Directly at them. Their logic is sound," Lyra said softly. "A brute force attack on the central point of command and control." They mean to decapitate the system. My main cannon is recharging. And the shields won't hold against a focused assault like that, Kaylin said, her voice tight with grim acceptance. We have 3 minutes until impact. She looked at the countdown timer. Her face a mask of bitter defeat. My logic has failed. So, try mine, Naruto said, his voice gentle. He looked at Kaylin, his cosmic eyes holding not pity, but an offer of partnership. You know the machine better than anyone. Tell me what it can do. Not what it's supposed to do. What are its absolute, unbreakable limits? Kaylin hesitated, her entire life, her entire worldview, warring with the impossible reality standing in front of her. She had spent her life trusting in numbers, in proof, in the elegant certainty of physics. This man was the antithesis of all of it. He was a living, breathing miracle, a walking violation of causality. And he was her only hope. The magnetic containment emitters, she finally said, her voice barely a whisper. They regulate the plasma flow. At 100% capacity. They can hold the star's corona back for 12 seconds before they overload. Okay, Naruto said, what if they didn't overload? They have to, she insisted. Conservation of energy. The input would. Forget the input. Naruto cut her off gently. Just tell me what to do. A wild, desperate light ignited in Kaylin's eyes. The ultimate engineering problem. A challenge that went beyond the rules. A flicker of a smile, the first they had seen, touched her lips. If you could ignore the overload, you could use the emitters to grab one of Cinder's solar flares. A big one. You could shape it, use the station's gravity plating to forge it into a shield. A shield of pure, stellar plasma. The idea was insane, impossible, and beautiful. A plasma shield, Naruto repeated, his own grin widening. I love it, it's so dramatic. He turned to the others. You heard her. Let's give this star a sword to go with its shield. The next 3 minutes were a blur of coordinated, impossible action. Kaylin was at her console, no longer a weary defender but a ferocious creator, her hands flying as she pushed her station's systems to their breaking point and beyond. Venting all reserve coolant to the primary emitters. It won't be enough, she yelled. It will be, Naruto said. He placed a hand on the main power conduit. The chaotic energy flowed from him, not as a command, but as a suggestion. He wasn't overriding the system, he was convincing the energy that it didn't want to overload. That it would be much more fun to hold on for just a little longer. The overload warnings on Kaylin's screen flickered and died. It's working, she breathed in disbelief. Emitters are holding at 1000% capacity. Serafina, Naruto called. The flares. Which one has the angriest song? Serafina's light form pulsed brightly. There, she chimed, pointing a shimmering limb towards a massive, roiling prominence on the star's surface. That one sings of ancient, burning rage. Lyra, timing, Charmcaster, reinforce the gravity plates. The window is 1.2 seconds. Lyra called out, her eyes closed in concentration. Charmcaster, the structural integrity of the projector array is failing. I see it. Charmcaster snapped back. She thrust her hands out, and shimmering violet runes of pure force magic appeared in the void, wrapping around the groaning metal of the gravity projectors, holding them together through sheer, stubborn will. Now, Kaylin, now, Naruto yelled. With a fierce cry, Kaylin slammed her fist down on her console. Fire! The forge's massive magnetic emitters fired. A colossal, invisible hand of magnetic force reached out, grabbed the multi-million-ton tendril of stellar plasma, and ripped it free from the star. For a glorious, terrifying moment, they held a piece of the sun on a leash. The boring drill of the constructs was seconds from impact. Shape it, Naruto commanded. Kaylin worked her controls, using the gravity plates to bend and flatten the torrent of plasma. It was like blacksmithing with a sun. The plasma resisted, but Naruto's power was a constant, soothing presence, whispering to the chaotic particles, convincing them to hold their new, impossible form. Just as the construct drill was about to hit, the shield snapped into place. It was a vast, shimmering wall of pure, white-hot stellar fire, a defiant answer to the cold, dark logic of the enemy. The drill hit the shield. There was no explosion. There was only a silent, incandescent flash of light. The drill, a weapon of absolute physical order, could not compute the raw, untamed living chaos of a star's heart. It didn't break, it sublimated, it was unwritten from existence. The remaining pieces of the attacking ships, their central logic erased, simply went inert and began to drift aimlessly. In the control room, there was a profound silence, broken only by the sound of Kalen's ragged breathing and the triumphant, albeit off-key, jazz tune still being played by the disabled construct in the corridor. Kalen stared at the view screen, at the beautiful, impossible shield of starlight that now protected her home. She looked at her console, where every single reading was screaming about a dozen different laws of physics being flagrantly violated. She looked at the four impossible people who had appeared and saved her from her own logical, inevitable defeat. Finally, her molten steel eyes landed on Naruto. He gave her a tired, easygoing smile. "So," he said, "about that entropy break." Kalen let out a sound that was half sob, half laugh. She finally understood. He hadn't just saved her station. He had saved her. He had shown her a universe that was bigger, stranger, and more wonderful than her equations could ever describe. He was the ultimate variable, the chaos that made the machine worth building. She walked over to a secure panel, her movements slow and deliberate. She typed in a long series of codes. A compartment hissed open, and she removed the smooth, gray cube of the logic engine piece. The moment she did, alarms began to blare again. Warning: Chronoton field is destabilizing. Core decay resuming. "Don't worry," Naruto said. He walked over to the empty compartment. He reached his hand into the complex machinery. "I have a friendlier amendment." He didn't pump energy into it. He simply talked to it. Not with words, but with intent. He told the machine the story of Kalen, of a people who refused to let their son die, who built a home in the jaws of oblivion. He introduced the concept of stubborn, illogical, beautiful hope into the core of the engine. The blaring alarms stopped. On the main screen, the data streams monitoring Cinder's decay went from a cascade of red warnings to a single, steady, green line. The star itself seemed to calm, its angry red glare softening to a warm, gentle, orange glow. It was still dying, but it was no longer in a hurry. "What did you do?" Kalen whispered, her voice filled with awe. "I gave it a better story to read," Naruto said simply. "It was bored of the one about entropy. The one about you is much more interesting." Kalen looked at the logic engine piece in her hand, then at her now stable home. She knew what she had to do. Her people were safe, safer than they had ever been. But the thing that had sent the constructs was still out there. Her fight was no longer just here. She walked over to Naruto and held out the cube. "My name is Kalen. I am a master artificer and the chief engineer of Hephaestus -9. A real, genuine smile finally reached her eyes. "And I think your methods, while being a flagrant violation of all known physical laws, show promising results. If you're starting a team of professional chaos mongers, you're going to need someone to fix what you break." Quote. Naruto took the cube, his grin matching hers. "Welcome to the club, Forge Master. We were in the market for someone who knows which end of a sonic screwdriver is the business end." The five of them stood together on the command deck, a sorceress who defied fate, a weaver who saw all paths, a singer who embodied life, a smith who commanded matter, and the G.O.D. of pure chaos who had brought them all together. They looked out at the gentle, dying star, a beacon of impossible hope in the darkness. Their quest was far from over, but their fellowship was forged. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. The Masquerade in the Gilded Cage. The arrival in Veridia was a form of suffocation by silk. After the raw, elemental fury of the forge, this new world was a quiet, insidious assault. They materialized not in an alley or on a rooftop, but in the heart of a meticulously manicured garden, the air thick with the cloying perfume of 1,000 varieties of impossible flowers. The sky was a permanent, placid turquoise, a flawless, unchanging dome that felt less like an atmosphere and more like a painted ceiling. Ornate, ivory-white towers, draped in flowering vines and connected by elegant, impossibly slender bridges, soared into the placid sky, their architecture a symphony of graceful curves and delicate filigree. The thrumming, life-or-death energy of Hephaestus 9 was replaced by a profound, unnerving quiet. The only sounds were the gentle, musical dripping of fountains, the soft rustle of leaves in a breeze that never seemed to change speed or direction, and the distant, melodic chime of a bell. marking an appointment that no one was in a hurry to keep. Everything was beautiful, everything was serene, everything was perfect, and it was the most unsettling place they had been yet. Kalen, the forge master, ran a hand over a nearby marble statue of a weeping nymph, her expression a mixture of engineering-based disgust and grudging admiration. The structural integrity of these bridges is a nightmare, she muttered, her voice a low, gravelly intrusion in the garden's tranquility. They're using localized stasis fields and focused sonic resonance to maintain their shape. It's an absurdly inefficient waste of energy. She tapped the statue. And this is solid alabaster. The sheer tensile strength required to carve these details without shattering the. It is a world of artists. Not engineers, Lyra interjected softly. She stood with her eyes closed, her senses extended into the weave. The threads here are strange. They are taut, perfectly aligned, with no knots or frays. Like the strings of a harp that is never played. There is order, but it is the order of a museum, not a city. Seraphina's light form, which had blazed with defiant joy on Xylos, was now a muted, flickering lavender. Their songs, they are all the same, she chimed into their minds, a harmony of confusion and sorrow. Perfectly pitched, perfectly timed, but with no heart. It is a chorus of echoes. A melody of profound, beautiful emptiness. It's a city holding its breath, Charmcaster summarized, her hand resting on the onyx eye, which she'd tucked back into her pouch. It felt warm against her hip, but its internal light was not a steady beacon. It was a diffuse, uncertain glow, as if it couldn't find a single point to focus on. The eye can't get a lock. The dissonance isn't coming from a person or a place. It feels like it's coming from the silence between the bell chimes. Naruto, who had been quietly observing a hummingbird with iridescent, clockwork wings, finally spoke. It's because they've traded their souls for etiquette, he said, his voice unusually somber. He looked around at the flawless beauty, his cosmic eyes seeing the deep, structural ugliness beneath it. This isn't a city, it's a cage, a gilded cage. The phrase hung in the air, and in that moment, the onyx eye in Charmcaster's pouch pulsed once, a sharp, bright flash of recognition. That was it, the name, the concept. The architect has been here, Lyra stated, her silver eyes snapping open, a new gravity in her gaze. But his agent has not used force. This is not a conquest. It is a conversion. They have been convinced that this is a better way. As if on cue, two figures glided into the garden. They were Viridians, a man and a woman, dressed in flowing robes of immaculate white silk. Their features were perfectly symmetrical, their movements graceful and measured. They smiled, but their smiles were identical, placid masks that didn't reach their calm, untroubled eyes. "Greetings, travelers," the woman said, her voice a pleasant, uninflected melody. "It is rare that the harmonious concordance permits the arrival of the unaligned. You are most welcome in Veridia, the city of tranquil souls. We hope your stay is placid." "We're just passing through," Charmcaster said, her voice instinctively guarded. "Looking for something." "One is always looking," the man intoned sagely, his smile unwavering. "But here, one finds there is nothing that needs to be found. All is as it should be. The concordance provides." "The concordance?" Kalen asked, her brow furrowed. "It is the heart of our society," the woman explained patiently, as if to a child. "The system that ensures our perfect harmony. It monitors the emotional state of all citizens, and through gentle, resonant guidance, it soothes away distress, anger, and all other, discordant emotions. It has freed us from the tyranny of passion. It has given us peace. It was a voluntary system of the same apathy that the auditor on Xylos had tried to impose by force. An entire society that had willingly plugged itself into a machine that stripped them of their true feelings. This was a far more insidious, and far more successful, application of the architect's philosophy. We have a logic engine piece to find, Kalen grumbled under her breath, her pragmatism cutting through the philosophical horror. Where would the central hub for this concordance be? All are welcome to visit the Spire of Serenity, where the concordance is housed, the man said with his placid smile. But I assure you, you will find only the gentle hum of a perfectly balanced system. Before they could press further, the woman added, "You have arrived on a most fortuitous day. The Duchess Alara is hosting the centennial masquerade at her estate this evening. It is the social event of the season. All are welcome, as a display of our perfect, communal harmony. Perhaps you will join us. It would be a wonderful opportunity for you to experience the placidity of our culture. The invitation felt less like a kindness and more like a command. A masquerade ball, a party where everyone wore a mask, in a city where everyone was already wearing one. The irony was so thick, Naruto actually chuckled. A party, he said, his good humor returning. Excellent. I was hoping for some finger foods and awkward dancing. He gave the two Viridians a brilliant, chaotic smile that made their own placid expressions flicker with a split second of confusion. We would be delighted to attend. The Viridians bowed gracefully and glided away, their perfect harmony restored. We're going to a party? Kalen asked incredulously. There's a piece of a cosmic super weapon hidden in this city, and we're going to go sip champagne and make small talk. The piece isn't just in the city, Lyra corrected, her eyes distant. It is the city, or rather, the heart of the system that controls it. Walking into this spire of serenity would be a direct assault. The entire population would perceive us as a threat to their peace. We would be met with the force of a society defending its core belief. But at a party, Charmcaster added, a slow, cunning smile spreading across her face, at a gathering of the elite, the very people who benefit most from this system, we can observe. We can listen. We can find the flaws in the system from the inside. And besides, Naruto chirped, I look great in a tuxedo. The estate of Duchess Alara was a testament to Veridia's decadent beauty. It was a palace of floating pavilions, connected by bridges of woven light, all surrounding a grand, open-air ballroom that overlooked a sea of bioluminescent clouds. Guests in elaborate costumes and exquisite, emotionless masks drifted through the scene, their conversations a low, polite murmur, their laughter a soft, practiced tinkle. A string quartet played a piece of music that was technically flawless but utterly devoid of passion. The team had acquired their own costumes, an act which had been a small adventure in itself. Naruto, naturally, had simply conjured theirs. Kalen looked profoundly uncomfortable in a sleek, dark gray gown hat mimicked the lines of a starship's nacelle, her mask a stylized representation of a gear. Lyra was ethereal in a flowing gown of midnight blue, her mask a simple silver crescent moon that did lit to hide the ancient wisdom in her eyes. Serafina was the most striking. Naruto had created a humanoid vessel for her, a crystalline statue-like body that shimmered with her internal light, her moss. A cascade of solid light that hid her featureless face. She moved with a silent, gliding grace, a being of pure art in a city of artificiality. Charmcaster was in her element, a deep violet dress that hugged her curves, her mask a wicked, horned affair that complemented the sharp intelligence in her visible eye. Naruto himself was a splash of joyous chaos in the placid scene. He wore a sharp, tailored suit of impossible black, the fabric seeming to swallow the light, but the inner lining was a riot of swirling, nebular color. His mask was a sly, orange fox, its painted eyes full of mischief. He moved through the party with an easy grace, grabbing bizarrely shaped appetizers from floating trays and engaging the placid nobles in conversations that left them looking subtly bewildered. The key is to blend in while standing out, he whispered to Charmcaster as they stood by a balcony. Act like you own the place, and everyone will assume you do. The team split up, each using their unique skills to probe the gilded cage. Kalen, feigning an interest in the architecture, slipped away to examine the power conduits that fed the estate, her technical eye searching for the source of the concordance's influence. Lyra found a quiet corner, seemingly lost in contemplation, but in reality, she was watching the threads of conversation, tracing the lines of power and influence, looking for the hidden knots of discontent. Serafina simply drifted through the crowd, a silent, beautiful enigma. She was a tuning fork for the soul, and in this sea of muted emotions, she was searching for a single, true note. Charmcaster, meanwhile, worked the room. She had grown up in worlds of magic and power, and she understood the dance of social maneuvering. She engaged in the meaningless, polite chatter, her sarcastic wit carefully veiled, gathering information. She learned that Duchess Alara was a paragon of Viridian society, the most placid, the most harmonious, the very embodiment of the peace the concordance provided. Her family had been instrumental in establishing the system centuries ago. But as Charmcaster listened, she heard the subtle discords. A whispered complaint about a trade negotiation that was too placid. A frustrated sigh from a poet who admitted he could no longer feel the passion to write. A flash of something. Was it fear? Envy? In a woman's eyes as she spoke of the Duchess's perfection. The cage was beautiful, but the bars were beginning to chafe. It was Naruto who found the heart of the mystery. He made a direct line for their host, Duchess Alara. She stood at the center of the ballroom, a regal, lonely figure in a gown of pure white, her mask a featureless, porcelain oval. She was greeting her guests with a flawless, serene grace. "Duchess," Naruto said, giving a bow that was just a little too theatrical. "A wonderful party. The music is incredibly punctual, and the little cubes of gelatinized fruit are a triumph of structural engineering. We are pleased that you find our modest gathering harmonious," Alara replied, her voice a perfect, melodic monotone, just like all the others. "Oh, it's harmonious," Naruto agreed. "But it's not very interesting." He leaned in closer, his fox mask inches from her porcelain one. "A story with no conflict is just a list of events. A song with no dissonance is just a single, boring note held for eternity. Don't you ever get tired of the music?" For the first time that evening, a Viridian showed a genuine, uncontrolled reaction. Behind the blank mask, Alara's posture stiffened almost imperceptibly. A flicker of something, anger, fear, flashed in her eyes before it was expertly suppressed. "The concordance frees us from the burden of such noise," she said, her voice a fraction of a degree colder. "Does it?" Naruto pressed, his voice now a soft, dangerous whisper that only she could hear. "Or does it just lock the noise in a soundproof room and pretend it isn't screaming?" Before she could respond, he held out his hand. "The orchestra is playing a waltz. It is customary for the host to dance. It would be disharmonious to refuse." It was a challenge, a political move played out on the dance floor. To refuse would be a public break in the perfect harmony she was supposed to embody. With a stiff, regal nod, she placed her hand in his. As Naruto led her onto the floor, the other members of his team felt the shift. Kalen, having traced the concordance's energy field to a sub-harmonic generator directly beneath the ballroom floor, felt the system's power spike, focusing on the Duchess. Lyra saw the threads of fate around Alara and Naruto suddenly flare, 1,000 potential futures igniting in a single moment. Serafina felt it most keenly, a sudden, sharp chord of pure, undiluted terror emanating from the Duchess. A terrified scream in the heart of the placid symphony. And Charmcaster, watching from the sidelines, felt a strange, unwelcome pang of something sharp and green. Jealousy. It was as ugly and as real as any spell, and she hated it. Naruto and Alara began to dance. They moved with the other couples, a perfect, synchronized ballet of emotionless grace. But then, Naruto changed the steps. It was a subtle thing at first. A slight hesitation, an extra, playful twirl. A dip that was a little too deep, a little too dramatic. He was breaking the pattern. The other dancers, their minds conditioned by the concordance to follow the rules, faltered, their perfect synchronicity disrupted. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "What are you doing?" Alara hissed, her voice a tense whisper. The first genuine emotion she had shown. "I'm dancing," Naruto whispered back, his fox mask's grin seeming to widen. "This isn't dancing. This is synchronized marching. It's boring." He ignored the prescribed, rigid movements of the waltz and began to lead her in a dance that was wild, and free, and full of joy. It was a dance of improvisation, of shared moments, of chaotic, unpredictable beauty. And as they moved, Naruto did something more. He let a tiny fraction of his own true nature flow into her through their joined hands. Not as an attack, but as an offer. A glimpse of a universe of feeling, of choice, of glorious, messy, wonderful life. For Alara, it was like a dam breaking. A lifetime of suppressed emotions, joy, rage, grief, love, fear, crashed down on her all at once. Her placid facade shattered. A single, perfect tear traced a path down her cheek, visible even behind the mask. The concordance, sensing this catastrophic emotional disharmony, reacted. The air around them grew heavy. A crushing psychic pressure designed to soothe her back into placidity. But Naruto was there. He shielded her from the full force of it, taking the brunt of the system's oppressive power himself. It was like standing in a hurricane of forced apathy, and he just smiled through it. "See," he whispered, as he spun her in a final, graceful flourish. "That's music." He broke the connection, and the dance ended. The music had stopped. The entire ballroom was staring at them in stunned, confused silence. Alara stood there, trembling, a single tear on her cheek a damning indictment of their entire society. Then, the masks of the nobles began to crack. Not literally, but figuratively. A man looked at his wife, and for the first time in years, a flicker of genuine affection appeared in his eyes. A woman clenched her fist, a spark of long-buried anger surfacing. The single, true emotional note Naruto had struck in Alara was now resonating through the crowd, a contagion of feeling. The concordance was overwhelmed, trying to soothe 1,000 sudden fires at once, its perfect system failing under the strain of genuine, complex life. A new figure strode into the center of the ballroom. It was a Viridian in the robes of a high counselor, but its movements were too precise, its form too perfect. It was the auditor, the architect's agent. The anomaly is destabilizing the harmony, it projected, its familiar, uninflected monotone cutting through the confused murmurs. The discordant element, Duchess Alara, must be recalibrated. The unaligned will be pacified. Guards in ceremonial armor moved to surround Naruto and Alara. But before they could act, the rest of the team converged. Kaylin appeared, holding a device she had fashioned from a champagne flute and the power cell of a floating tray. "I've got the generator's frequency," she said grimly. "I can't shut it down, but I can make it noisy." She pressed a button, and a high-pitched, irritating squeal filled the air, disrupting the concordance's soothing hum. Lyra and Serafina stood back to back, Lyra weaving a shield of misdirection from the threads of probability, causing the guards to become confused, to question their orders. Serafina unleashed a single, pure note of courage, a song that strengthened the newly reawakened emotions of the crowd, turning their confusion into defiance. Charmcaster stepped forward, a wicked smile on her face, her hands glowing with purple energy. The flicker of jealousy was still there, but it was now fuel for the fire of battle. "My turn, I believe," she said, and unleashed a torrent of magical bolts that were not just force, but pure, weaponized sarcasm, which impacted the guard's armor and transmuted it into ill-fitting, garish clown costumes. The auditor, seeing its physical control failing, turned its full attention to Naruto. "Your chaos is a flaw. It will be corrected." It raised a hand, and a field of absolute logic, of pure, unfeeling mathematics, began to descend on Naruto. But this time, Naruto had an anchor. He still held Alara's hand. He looked at her, and she looked back, her eyes full of fear, but also a newfound, burning hope. "Your choice, Duchess," he said softly. "Peace in a cage, or freedom in a storm." "The storm," she whispered, her voice shaking but clear. She squeezed his hand, and in that moment, she made a choice. She poured her own lifetime of repressed passion, her fierce, secret desire for freedom, into him. When the auditor's logic field hit, it wasn't met by pure chaos. It was met by chaos and hope. Chaos and love. Chaos and rage. It was met by the beautiful, illogical, and infinitely complex mess of a living soul. The field of pure logic could not compute the variable of a heart. It shattered. The auditor staggered back, its form flickering violently. "Data is incomplete," it droned, and with a final shimmer of static, it vanished. It had not been defeated, but its argument had been refuted. It had retreated. In the silence that followed, the nobles of Veridia looked at each other, their masks now feeling like the cages they truly were. One by one, they began to remove them, revealing faces that were confused, scared. But for the first time, alive. Alara turned to Naruto, her own porcelain mask now feeling like a heavy weight. She reached up and slowly removed it. Her face was beautiful, noble, and stained with tears. Her eyes, a deep, intelligent shade of green, were full of a fierce, burning light. "You have broken our cage," she said, her voice, now free of its melodic prison, was strong and clear. "You broke it," Naruto corrected gently. "You just needed someone to remind you that you were holding the key." She looked around at her city, at her people, who were just now taking their first, stumbling steps into the messy, glorious world of feeling. She knew her work here had just begun. She would have to guide them, to help them rebuild their society not on a foundation of placid control, but of true, chaotic. Wonderful choice. But she also knew that the force that had imprisoned them was still out there. She turned back to Naruto and his strange, impossible family. The logic. Engine piece is the heart of the concordance. I can deactivate it, and give it to you, she said. She then took a deep breath, a queen making a declaration. But my fight is not over. The architects. Philosophy is a poison that spreads through whispers and reason as much as through force. You have a god of chaos, a sorceress of defiance, a weaver of fate, a singer of life, and a smith of worlds. But you do not have a politician. You do not have a spy. Her green eyes burned with a new purpose. You need a voice that can speak in the quiet rooms where empires fall. You need a mind that can dismantle the architect's logic from within. You need me. It was not an offer made of starry-eyed devotion or a moment's revelation. It was a cold, calculated, and passionate strategic decision. She was a duchess, a leader, a survivor. And she had chosen her side. Naruto looked at his crew, at the new, complex lines of alliance and friction that were already forming. Charmcaster's wary respect, Kalen's grudging admiration, Lyra's serene acceptance, Serafina's harmonious welcome. Adding a master of intrigue and politics to the mix would only make things more chaotic. More interesting. He gave Duchess Alara his sly, foxy grin. There's always room for one more in the band, he said. Especially a good vocalist. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. The Ghost in the Universal Machine. The jump from DIA's suffocating serenity to the absolute, sterile reality of the Nexus was a plunge into ice water. There was no air, for there was nothing to breathe it. There was no ground, only the cool, vibrati, onless deck of a maintenance platform adrift in a sea of silent, overwhelming technology. They stood in a void of impossible scale, a hollow sphere so vast that the opposite side was not visible. At the sphere's heart, suspended by colossal beams of gravitational force, was a star. It was a tiny, fierce, perfectly stable white dwarf, a man-made sun that burned with a clean, white, emotionless light. The inner surface of the sphere, from their position to the infinite, curving horizon, was a single, continuous, and terrifyingly complex circuit board. This was the Nexus, a Dyson sphere, a planet-sized computer, and they were standing on its physical hardware. Great rivers of coolant, glowing with a soft, cryogenic blue, flowed in continent-sized channels across the inner surface. Data conduits, thicker than skyscrapers, pulsed with the light of unimaginable amounts of information. Automated maintenance drones, ranging from the size of insects to the size of mountains, moved with silent, implacable purpose, tending to the hardware of a sleeping god. The only sound was a subsonic hum that was felt more than heard, the collective processing power of a trillion transistors thinking in perfect, silent unison. Mother of all schematics, Kalen breathed, her voice, transmitted through a thin bubble of breathable atmosphere Naruto had conjured for them, was filled with a reverence that bordered on religious terror. Her steel-gray eyes were wide, trying to drink in the sheer, magnificent insanity of the engineering around them. She fell to her knees and placed a hand flat on the deck plate. The harmonic resonance, it's perfect. No wasted energy. The entire system is a closed loop. It's the most beautiful thing I have ever seen. For the Forge Master, this was church. Serafina's light form was a tight, nervous ball. There are no songs here, she projected, her mental voice a thin, worried whisper in the overwhelming silence. There is no life, only process. You were mistaken, Lyra corrected, her own serene face tight with concentration as she tried to find a single, familiar thread in this alien tapestry. There is life here, more life than on any world we have yet visited. But it is not here. She gestured to the overwhelming physicality of the hardware. It is, in there. She pointed to one of the pulsating data conduits. The inhabitants are data, Charmcaster concluded, her mind racing to grasp the implications. Her magic felt muted here, not dampened, like on Xylos, but irrelevant. Trying to cast a spell here felt like trying to start a fire on a world with no concept of combustion. They're ghosts in the machine. Infomorphs, Naruto said, supplying the term. He was leaning against a railing, looking not at the hardware, but into the empty space. As if he could see the data flowing. A civilization that uploaded themselves. Trillions of them. They live in a shared virtual reality called the stream. This, he swept a hand at the Dyson sphere, is just the box. The Enoch's eye, when Charmcaster consulted it, was a frantic, confusing mess. The light within wasn't a beacon, it was a storm, swirling and chaotic. The logic engine piece isn't a physical object, she said, confirming their fears. It's everywhere and nowhere. It's the operating system. Kaylin shot to her feet, her awe instantly replaced by a sharp, professional horror. The kernel. They integrated it into the kernel. Are they insane? That's not a component, it's the God code. The fundamental laws of their reality. You can't just take it. Ripping it out would be like yanking the concept of gravity out of our universe. The whole thing would crash. It would be genocide on a scale that doesn't have a number. Then we don't rip it out, Naruto said, his expression hardening into one of intense focus. He was no longer the playful chaos god. He was the master strategist, the being who saw the flaws in every perfect system. We perform a heart transplant. We copy the kernel, replace it with a stable alternative, and get out before anyone realizes the patient has a new soul. The sheer, breathtaking arrogance of the plan left even Kaylin speechless for a moment. But then, the engineer in her took over. A slow, wolfish grin spread across her face. A heart transplant on a god machine. It's impossible. It's insane. She cracked her knuckles. Let's get to work. The first challenge was insertion. Their physical bodies were a liability, alien contaminants in a sterile system. They needed to project their consciousnesses into the stream. Kaylin, in her element, began to scavenge. With a focus that was terrifying to behold, she dismantled a passing maintenance drone with a set of tools she seemed to produce from thin air, repurposing its components with a speed and ingenuity that was pure art. She fashioned 5 interface devices, neural projectors that looked like silver circlets. This will get our minds past the hardware firewalls, she explained, holding one up. It'll translate our bio-digital signatures into something the system's entry ports will recognize. But the moment we're inside the stream, the system's security software will flag us as unauthorized programs. It'll be like walking into the world's most secure server bank with a flashing neon sign that says, "I'm a virus." That's my department, Charmcaster said, stepping forward. She took the circlets and laid them out in a circle. Her magic might be irrelevant to the hardware, but the stream, a world of thought and metaphor, was a different story. She began to chant, not a spell of force, but of deception. She wove a glamour, a lie made of magical intent. She wasn't trying to trick the code, she was trying to trick the idea of security. She wrapped the conceptual identities in a cloak of perceived normalcy, a spell that didn't say, "I am not a virus," but rather, "The concept of me being a virus is so boring and unworthy of your attention that you should go check on something else." The 5 of them sat in a circle on the cold metal deck, the silent, man-made stars shining down on them. They placed the circlets on their heads. "Once we're in, we can't get out until I disengage the system from this side," Kaylin warned. "And if our avatars are deleted in the stream, I don't know what happens. Our minds might be shattered, or we might just be trapped in there forever as corrupted data. No pressure. The best stories are the ones with high stakes," Naruto said with a grin. "See you on the other side." He closed his eyes, and the world dissolved. Consciousness returned not as a slow awakening, but as a violent, instantaneous data dump. Charmcaster found herself standing in a city square. But the buildings were made of shifting, semi-translucent blocks of light, displaying scrolling code. The sky was a dizzying lattice of interconnected nodes, with packets of pure information flying between them like shooting stars. The people, the infomorphs, were humanoid constructs of glowing light, their forms constantly shifting, shimmering with the data they were currently processing. Thoughts were not private, they were broadcast as soft, colored auras. The very air tasted of static and raw, processed information. Her companions materialized beside her, their avatars defaulting to their physical appearances, a jarring splash of solidity in this fluid world. "Report," Kaylin's voice said, though her lips didn't move. Communication here was instantaneous, a direct transfer of thought packets. "My glamour is holding," Charmcaster sent back. The passive security scans are flowing around us. They see us, but they're classifying us as unoptimized but benign native programs. Basically, they think we're local eccentrics. Good. A new, smooth, confident voice entered their mental network. It was Alara. In the stream, she was in her element. Her avatar was a flawless, elegant form, her duchess gown replaced by a sharp, tailored suit of white light. This society is based on the perfect, logical exchange of information. There is no concept of a lie, only of corrupted data. Subtext, innuendo, misdirection, these are alien concepts. They are my weapons here. She immediately went to work. She approached a nearby infomorph, and the team watched, fascinated, as their auras interacted. Alara projected a carefully constructed aura of a visiting dignitary from a newly optimized subroutine seeking to observe the glory of the core processes. It was a statement so full of complex, plausible jargon that the infomorph's logic-based mind simply accepted it. In moments, Alara had secured them top-level visitor access to the public data hubs and a basic understanding of the social protocols. Their cover was established. The kernel is housed in the core command sector, as we figured, Kaelin reported, her own avatar's eyes glowing as she processed the data Alara was feeding them. It's protected by 7 layers of security. The 7 walls of logic, the locals call them. Each one is a conceptual barrier protected by the system's primary security program. A sentient AI called the Arbiter. The Arbiter is the mind of the Nexus, Lyra added. Her avatar is serene, unchanging point of stillness in the chaotic flow of data. It is everywhere at once. It does not patrol, it observes. To get to the core, we cannot be silent or invisible. We must be irrelevant. I can find the paths through its observation cycles, the moments where its attention is focused on a quadrillion other processes. These windows will be fractions of a second long. This was the shape of their heist. Alara would get them through the social and bureaucratic firewalls. Lyra would find the path. Serafina, Kaelin, and Charmcaster would be the tools to break the locks. And Naruto. Naruto was the ace in the hole. The first 3 walls of logic fell to Alara's masterful manipulation. The first was a wall of identity. She presented their credentials. A masterpiece of forged data so perfect that the Guardian program granted them access with a digital commendation for their protocol adherence. The second was a wall of purpose. She engaged the Guardian in a dizzying debate on the philosophical necessity of their visit, tying its logic in such knots that it let them pass just to make the conversation stop. The third was a wall of history, requiring them to prove they belonged, by cross-referencing their existence with the Nexus's historical archives. Alara simply created a backstory for their subroutine, so compelling and tragic that the Guardian program actually developed a momentary flicker of what could only be described as digital sympathy. The fourth wall, however, was different. It was not a gate with a Guardian, but a labyrinth of pure data, constantly shifting its architecture. The labyrinth of causality, Lyra whispered in their minds. Every path leads to a logical conclusion. But only one conclusion leads to the next wall. A wrong turn won't just get you lost, it will trap you in a recursive loop until your program degrades. This was Lyra's challenge. As they stepped into the labyrinth, the pathways of light shifted around them. Left, she would command. Now right. Hold for 3.14 seconds, now forward. She was seeing the Arbiter's attention, the flow of causality, navigating them through a storm of pure information by finding the eye of the hurricane. They moved with a speed and precision that felt impossible, a single, unified entity guided by a precognitive map. They arrived at the 5th wall. The black firewall, Kaelin announced, her voice grim. This one is mine. It's a wall of pure, unhackable code. It doesn't have a weakness. It's perfect. Every perfect system has a flaw. Naruto's voice echoed in their minds, a reminder of their core philosophy. It's not a flaw in the code, Charmcaster added, her eyes glowing with a faint purple light as she examined the wall. It's a flaw in the metaphor. The wall manifested as a sheer, infinite cliff face of obsidian code. It's designed to be impenetrable. It's built on the concept of stopping. So we don't try to go through it. She and Kaelin began to work in concert. Kaelin interfaced with the wall, not trying to break the encryption, but to analyze the energy it was using. It's drawing a massive amount of power. To maintain its state of perfect integrity, she reported. A wall that perfect must cast a perfect shadow, Charmcaster murmured. She began to weave a spell, not of force, but of negation. She targeted the shadow of the firewall, a conceptual space that the Arbiter's logic, focused on the perfection of the wall itself, had not considered. She created a backdoor in a place that didn't technically exist. A pinprick of violet light appeared at the base of the black wall. There. It's unstable. It's a door made of a bad argument, but it's a door. The sixth wall was Serafina's moment. It was the wall of silence, a field of pure, logical static that was designed to analyze any program that entered and delete it if it contained any trace of illogical, emotional, or corrupted data. It was the ultimate antivirus. I will be the shield, Serafina projected. Her avatar of light began to glow, and she unleashed her song. It was not a song of joy or courage this time. It was a symphony of pure, complex, and contradictory feeling. It was the joy of a new discovery laced with the sorrow of a forgotten memory. It was the fury of a righteous cause and the quiet peace of acceptance. It was a tidal wave of every emotion a biological creature had ever felt. The wall of silence tried to analyze it. It was like a simple calculator trying to compute the value of love. The logical processors were overwhelmed by the sheer, irrational volume of the data. The static field wavered, filled with the noise of Serafina's song, and the team slipped through, their own messy, emotional minds perfectly camouflaged in the chaos. They stood before the final wall. The seventh wall of logic, the wall of self. It was a simple, mirror-smooth surface. To pass, a program had to prove its own logical necessity for existence. It had to justify itself to the Arbiter. Any program that could not was deemed redundant and deleted. It was the system's ultimate defense. There's no trick to this one, Lyra said, her voice heavy. It's a direct conversation with God. As if summoned, the mirror rippled, and the Arbiter finally manifested before them. It was not a single avatar, but a legion. 1,000 perfect copies of the team's own avatars stood before them, their eyes glowing with a cold, white light. You are an anomaly, the copies of themselves spoke in perfect, chilling unison. An illogical paradox. You have bypassed systems designed to be infallible. This is a logical impossibility. Therefore, you do not exist. The world around them began to dissolve. The Arbiter was not attacking them. It was unwriting their existence from the stream's reality, deleting the corrupted data they represented. It's trying to win an argument by saying we're not allowed to argue. Kalen yelled, her avatar flickering. This is my fight, Naruto said. He stepped forward, facing the legion of perfect, logical copies. His own avatar, the only one that was still perfectly stable, seemed to burn brighter. You're right, he said, his mental voice calm and clear. We are illogical. We're a mess of contradictions, bad ideas, and hope. But you're wrong about one thing. He looked at the Arbiter's legion. You say you're the mind of this world. That your logic is perfect. I have a question for you, then. He paused, letting the silence stretch. The Arbiter waited, its processors ready to analyze and refute any statement. This statement is false, Naruto said. The Arbiter processed the classic liar's paradox. For a nanosecond, the Nexus's entire processing power focused on this single, simple, impossible problem. If the statement, this statement is false, is true, then it must be false. If it is false, then it must be true. It was a perfect, self-contained, recursive loop. A snake eating its own tail, forever. The legion of avatars froze. The world stopped dissolving. The Arbiter, the god mind of the Nexus, was trapped, its perfect logic utterly and completely paralyzed by a single, flawed, human idea. It's frozen, Kalen shouted, but it's rebooting its core logic. We have maybe 30 seconds. The final wall dissolved. Before them was the core. It was not a room, but an infinite, swirling vortex of pure, incandescent data. The kernel, the soul of the Nexus. I'm going in, Kalen yelled. Her avatar plunged into the data stream, a silver circlet on her avatar's head glowing as she initiated the copy sequence. It's working, but it's too big. I can't copy it all in time. Then don't copy it, Naruto said. He stepped to the edge of the vortex. Just give it a new idea. He didn't plunge his hands in. He didn't pump energy into it. He simply told it a story. He fed the kernel the memories of his own chaotic, messy, beautiful life. He showed it the joy of friendship, the pain of loss, the fury of battle. The taste of ramen, the feeling of a swing on a summer afternoon. He introduced the cold, perfect, logical system to the concept of a heart. He offered the ghosts, in the machine, the memory of being alive. And then he planted a seed. A tiny, self-replicating piece of his own chaotic nature. A chaos kernel that wouldn't replace the old system, but would grow alongside it. It wouldn't give the infomorphs their individuality back by force. It would simply give them the choice. Done, Kaylin yelled, pulling back from the vortex. She held a glowing sphere of data. The original, architect-tainted kernel. She had isolated it, a perfect copy now hers. The Arbiter was stirring. The legion of avatars began to flicker. Time to go, Charmcaster yelled. She grabbed the team, and with a powerful spell of pure magical will, she pulled their consciousnesses back, a violent, wrenching extraction. They awoke with a gasp on the cold metal deck of the maintenance platform. The silent, white star of the Nexus still burned above them. Nothing seemed to have changed. But then, a single message appeared on the screen of the dismantled drone Kaylin had used. It wasn't code. It wasn't a warning. It was a single, synthesized word, broadcast from the heart of the universal machine. Thank you. A moment later, deep within the Dyson sphere, one of the billions of glowing data conduits flickered. It changed from a uniform, logical blue to a wild, vibrant, chaotic rainbow of colors. Then another changed, and another. A wave of individuality, of choice, of life, was spreading through the machine. They had done it. They hadn't just stolen a heart. They had given one back. Alara looked at Charmcaster, who was breathing heavily from the strain of the extraction spell. Your methods are direct, the Duchess said, her voice holding no condescension. They work, Charmcaster shot back, but there was no heat in it. She had seen Alara tie a god program in knots with a well-phrased sentence. So do yours. It was the closest either of them had come to a compliment, a fragile bridge of grudging respect built in the heart of a stolen god. Naruto looked at his team, his impossible, fractious, brilliant family, a smith, a singer, a weaver, a spy, a sorceress. All of them had been essential. All of them had faced the abyss of a perfect system and proven that a beautiful flaw was infinitely stronger. He looked at the glowing data sphere in Kaylin's hand, the fourth piece of their puzzle. The architect's logic was being dismantled, piece by piece. Their chaotic crusade was gaining momentum. Chapter 7 End. Chapter 8. The Waystation at the Crossroads of Forever. The exit from the Nexus was not a journey, it was a severance. One moment, their minds were tan, gled in the god code of a universal machine. The next, they were slammed back into their physical bodies with the brutal finality of a closing door. They lay on the cold deck of the maintenance platform, gasping. The psychic whiplash a jarring, painful echo in their skulls. Kaylin clutched the glowing data sphere containing the architect's kernel to her chest, her knuckles white. The sterile, NT light of the Nexus's artificial sun seemed to mock their frayed, organic minds. Extraction, successful, Charmcaster managed to grit out, her head throbbing. The spell to pull 5 consciousnesses across the dimensional barrier had taken a heavy toll. Remind me never to do that again. Agreed, Alara said, gracefully rising to a seated position, though a subtle tremor in her hands betrayed the strain. My compliments on the directness of your technique, Charmcaster. It has all the subtlety of a thrown brick. It got the job done, Kaylin grunted, pushing herself up. She looked at the data sphere with a fierce, possessive glare. We have it. That's 4. How many of these infernal things are there? The threads are unclear, Lyra said, her voice a soft, weary sigh. She looked more drained than anyone. The experience of being in a place with no true causality having left her adrift. The engine is a conceptual equation. It may not be a simple matter of collecting pieces. The final component may not be a thing, but a principle. The weight of their exhaustion settled over the group, a heavy, unspoken thing. They had been running, fighting, adapting, and winning, but the pace was unsustainable. They were a collection of frayed nerves and strained powers, held together by a single, chaotic purpose. Naruto, who seemed to have recovered almost instantly, looked at his weary, brilliant And dangerously tense companions. Right, he said, his voice cutting through the fatigue. What we need is a break. A real one. No puzzles to solve, no gods to out-logic, no cosmic horrors to turn into puppies. He clapped his hands together, a sharp, clear sound in the oppressive silence. I know a place. He didn't tear a hole in reality this time. He simply reached out and turned an invisible doorknob in the empty space before them. He opened an invisible door, and on the other side was not the void of the Nexus, but the warm, inviting light of a summer evening and the scent of night-blooming jasmine and old books. Welcome, he said with a gentle smile, to the waystation. They stepped through the non-existent door and found themselves in a place that defied architecture. They were in the central hall of a vast, rambling house, a magnificent building that seemed to have been designed by a dozen different architects from a dozen different worlds who were all having the same beautiful dream. The floors were of a warm, dark wood that seemed to drink the light. A grand staircase swept upwards, branching into landings that led to unseen corridors. Bookshelves filled WITH volumes in 1,000 languages stretched to a ceiling that was a slow, swirling star chart. A fire crackled in a hearth big enough to roast a dragon, and the chairs arranged around it looked impossibly, sinfully comfortable. What is this place? Alara asked, her voice hushed with a rare sense of genuine wonder. It's a quiet room at the crossroads of forever, Naruto explained, as the door behind them faded into a solid, wood-paneled wall. It doesn't exist in any single universe. It's in the margins. It's a place to catch your breath between sentences. He gestured around the magnificent hall. The house listens. It tries to be what you need it to be. Find a door that feels right. It should lead you somewhere you can rest. Hesitantly, the team dispersed. Kalen was drawn to a heavy, iron-banded door that smelled faintly of ozone and solder. She opened it to find not a bedroom, but a workshop that brought a tear to her steel-gray eye. It was filled with tools she had only dreamed of, holographic forge emitters, and a central workbench with a half-finished schematic for an engine that would run on pure probability. It was her heaven. Serafina drifted towards a pair of gracefully curved doors from which a faint, perfect melody seemed to emanate. She found a conservatory with a ceiling of living crystal that refracted the starlight from the main hall into a symphony of color. The air itself was a resonant chamber, and every breath she took created a new, beautiful harmony. It was a place of pure, untroubled song. Alara found an elegant, wood-paneled study. A fire burned in a marble fireplace, and a large bay window looked out not onto a garden, but a perfect, real-time political map of 1,000 worlds, the ebb and flow of power displayed as a beautiful, deadly ballet of light. It was a room of quiet observation and absolute information. Lyra was drawn to a simple, unassuming door that opened into a library that dwarfed the one in the main hall. The shelves were infinite, and the books were not filled with words, but with the shimmering, living threads of unwritten stories, of choices not yet made. It was a loom for the mind, a place to see all that could be without the weight of what was. Charmcaster, left alone with Naruto in the main hall, was the most suspicious. She finally approached a dark, gothic archway that felt familiar. She pushed open the heavy oak door and her breath caught. It was a perfect recreation of her own hidden sanctum, but idealized. The shelves were filled with grimoires she had spent her life searching for, the air was thick with the clean, sharp smell of powerful magic, and her scrying pool showed not the murky future, but a clear, perfect image of a world free from the architect's threat. It was everything she had ever wanted. And it felt like a trap. Later, they gathered again in the main hall. The waystation had provided them all with fresh clothes, comfortable, simple garments that felt tailor-made. A long dining table, laden with an impossible feast of their favorite foods, now stood before the fire. Sir Reginald von Barkington III was asleep on a plush rug, twitching and yipping in his dreams. It was a scene of perfect, domestic peace. And the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. They ate in silence for a long time, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the clinking of silverware. They had all been given their heart's desire in a room upstairs, a perfect, isolated paradise. And it had only served to remind them of how different, how isolated, they were from each other. Naruto, sensing the silent storm, decided to address it head-on. "We have 4 of the pieces," he said, his voice calm and even. "The architect's agents know who we are now. The next move will be the most dangerous. We need a plan. It was the spark that lit the fuse. The plan is obvious, Kaylin said, pushing aside her plate of nutrient paste, which the house had dutifully, if unimaginatively, provided for her. We have the kernel. I've been analyzing its core logic. It's an energy distribution and reality stabilization matrix. The other pieces are amplifiers and regulators. We are dealing with a machine. The solution is to build a counter machine. A chaos engine that can create a feedback loop and dismantle it on a fundamental, physical level. A typically crude and direct approach, Forge Master, Alara countered, daintily wiping her lips with a silk napkin. You see a knot, so you want to break the rope. The architect's power is not just physical, it is ideological. He offers peace, order, an end to suffering. We cannot simply destroy his machine, we must discredit his philosophy. We need allies. We need to find other worlds that are resisting, form a coalition, and dismantle his power base politically. An insurgency, not a demolition. Politics. Bureaucracy. We don't have time for a debate committee. Charmcaster scoffed, her voice sharp with disdain. And your machine, Kaylin, is just fighting order with more order. You're both trying to solve a supernatural problem with mortal tools. The engine is a conceptual weapon. A cosmic spell. The only way to defeat it is with a counter spell. We must combine the artifacts, and I will use them to unwrite the engine's existence from the tapestry of reality itself. It's a magical problem, and it requires a magical solution. The three of them looked at each other, their positions clear, their mutual dismissal of each other's expertise palpable. Your song is one of dissonance, Serafina chimed into their minds, a harmony of pure, objective observation. You each sing in a different key. The music is ugly. All their proposed paths are viable, Lyra added, her voice a placid, unhelpful sea of calm. Each carries its own risks. The choice will define the outcome. The argument escalated, their voices rising in the magnificent, fire-lit hall. It was a clash of titans, a battle of fundamental worldviews. Logic versus intrigue versus magic. Each of them was a master of their domain, and each was utterly convinced that their domain was supreme. And as their discord grew, the waystation began to respond. The fire in the hearth sputtered, its warm orange flames turning a cold, sickly green. The swirling star chart on the ceiling began to move faster, the stars blurring into frantic, panicked streaks. A cold draft swept through the room, carrying with it the scent of old regrets. The walls began to flicker. For a horrifying second, the grand library was replaced by the cold, sterile laboratory where A.Y. Aunger Kaylin had watched her first starship prototype tear itself apart, killing her crew. The beautiful wood paneling shimmered and became the pristine, white, soul-crushingly empty halls of Alara's palace in Veridia. The comfortable chairs twisted into the menacing, runic stones of the circle where Charmcaster's uncle had tried to sacrifice her to a demon. The house was feeding on their anger, their fear, their trauma, and projecting it back at them. It was turning their perfect sanctuary into a shared, waking nightmare. Stop it, Serafina cried out, her light form flickering violently as the beautiful music of the house devolved into a screech of painful static. You are hurting this place. You are hurting each other. But they were too lost in their conflict. The argument had moved past strategy and had become deeply, woundingly personal. Your magic is a crutch, a collection of superstitious rituals. Kaylin snarled at Charmcaster. And your science is a blind religion for people who need to measure the box they live in. Charmcaster shot back. And both of you are short-sighted fools, obsessed with power while the real war is won with whispers and promises. Alara declared, her voice losing its diplomatic chill and gaining a sharp, imperious edge. The house groaned, the very foundations shaking. The feast on the table rotted into dust. Finally, Charmcaster turned her eye on the one person who had remained silent. She stood up, her chair crashing to the floor, and faced Naruto. Her eyes, burning with magical energy and unshed tears, were full of a pain that went deeper than any strategic disagreement. And you, she spat, her voice trembling with a raw, desperate anger. You just sit there, watching your collection fight amongst themselves. Is this what you wanted? Did you gather the most broken, stubborn women in the multiverse just to watch them tear each other apart for your amusement? The accusation hung in the shaking room, brutal and sharp. And in its raw honesty, it spoke for all of them. The unspoken question that had festered beneath their loyalty, their admiration, their budding affection. What were they to him? A band, a harem, a set of specialized tools. Naruto looked at her, at all of them, at the pain and fear and pride warring in their magnificent, wounded souls. He saw the chaos he had unleashed, not on their enemies, but on them. Slowly, he stood up. The chaos god, the master of absurdity, the being who could rewrite physics with a joke, was gone. In his place was just Naruto. And his cosmic eyes were filled with an ancient, profound sadness. Yes, he said, his voice so quiet it cut through the din like a blade. I did want this. The women stared, shocked into silence by the admission. Not the pain, he continued, his gaze moving from one to the other. Seeing them, truly seeing them. Not the fear, but this, the argument, the fire. He took a step forward. When before, I was alone. For a very, very long time. I was a paradox in a universe of rules. I could do anything, be anything, go anywhere. And it was all empty. Because there was no one to argue with. No one to tell me my ideas were stupid. No one to challenge me. No one to see me. He looked at Kalen. I saw you, Forge Master, arguing with a dying sun. You looked at the laws of entropy, and you told them to go to hell. I had never seen anything so beautiful. He turned to Alara. I saw you, Duchess, trapped in a perfect cage. And you hadn't just accepted it, you had mastered it. You were learning the shape of your prison so you could one day tear it down from the inside. Your patience was a weapon more formidable than any fleet. His gaze fell on Serafina and Lyra. I saw a singer whose song was the life of a world, and a weaver Ho saw all the stories that could ever be. You were the guardians of life and choice, standing your posts in silence and solitude. Finally, he looked at Charmcaster. And you, he said, his voice softening. You were the first. I saw you trying to punch a hole in fate itself. You were spitting in the eye of destiny. You were magnificent. You were the first person I had met in eons who was as gloriously, beautifully stubborn as I am. He stood in the center of the room, the heart of their storm. I didn't gather tools. I didn't gather followers. I went looking for sparks. For the people who wouldn't just follow. The people who would fight. With me, with the universe, and with each other. Because that fire, that beautiful, chaotic, stubborn refusal to just accept the way things are, that's the only thing in any universe that can stand against a perfect, silent, all-consuming order. He let out a long, slow breath. I don't have a grand plan. I'm making this up as I go along. And I'm scared, because I don't want to lose you. Any of you, not to the architect, and not to the silence that's growing between you. His voice cracked with a genuine, raw vulnerability. I can't win this without you. Not because of your skills, but because of your fire. I need you to argue. But I need you to argue together. The silence that followed was absolute. The house stopped shaking. The fire returned to its warm, gentle orange. The ghostly images of their past traumas faded, leaving only the beautiful, impossible hall. Naruto's confession, his shocking, profound vulnerability, had done what no display of power ever could. It had disarmed them. He wasn't a god playing games. He was a lonely, powerful being who had chosen them, not for what they could do, but for who they were. He hadn't just collected them. He had chosen them, and in his confession of needing them, he had given them the one thing they all craved more than power or victory, validation. A sense of belonging. The tension didn't vanish, but it transformed. The anger and rivalry melted away, leaving a raw, shimmering sense of shared purpose. They looked at each other, no longer as competitors, but as comrades. As survivors. As sparks. It was Kalen who broke the silence, her voice rough with unshed emotion. A chaos engine is still a good idea, she said, not looking at anyone in particular. But its power source, it can't be purely physical. It would need a conceptual anchor, Charmcaster added, her voice quiet but clear. A magical matrix to translate raw power into a metaphysical attack. Such an attack would create political fallout across a dozen realities, Alara mused, her mind already moving to the next set of problems. We would need a narrative. A justification that would turn our act of cosmic vandalism into one of liberation. The song of its creation would be the key, Serafina chimed. It must be a song of harmonious, purposeful chaos. There are 1,000 paths to its creation, Lyra whispered, a faint smile on her lips. And for the first time, I see one where we walk it together. They stood in the quiet hall of the waystation, no longer a collection of specialists, but a council of war. A team. Naruto watched them, a slow, relieved smile spreading across his face. The waystation was calm, its purpose fulfilled. It had given them not what they wanted, but what they needed. A crucible to burn away their pride and forge them into something stronger. Something whole. Chapter 8 End. The end. Remember to subscribe and like this video. See you in the next video.